Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto become the pirate king in world of One Piece and got harem with Nami? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Maelstrom's Arrival. The world ended in a flash of blinding, silent white. One moment, Naruto Uzumaki was locked in a cataclysmic struggle against a being that sought to unravel reality itself, his entire world's fate balanced on the razor's edge of his power. The next, he was falling through an endless, churning void where color and sound had no meaning. He felt a tear, a violent separation from everything he had ever known. The scent of ramen from Ichiraku, the weight of the Hokage's cloak on his shoulders, the warmth of his children's hands in his. They were all stripped away, leaving an aching emptiness that echoed the silence around him. Then came the storm. He slammed into water so cold it felt like a physical blow, the impact driving the air from his lungs. Saltwater stung his eyes as he fought against a current that pulled and tore at him with malicious intent. The sky above was a bruise of black and purple, split open by jagged fissures of lightning. Rain fell in punishing sheets, and waves, colossal and black, rose like mountains before crashing down with the force of a biju's roar. This was not his world. The energy in the air was different, wilder, untamed. He could feel it in the very water that tried to drown him. He was a stranger here, an anomaly. But despair was a luxury he had never been afforded. With a surge of raw will, Naruto forced chakra to his feet, ending a precarious purchase on the churning surface of the sea. He stood, a lone figure in a tattered black and orange jumpsuit, surrounded by the Maelstrom's fury, his blonde hair plastered to his face and his blue eyes burning with a defiant fire that no storm could extinguish. He didn't know where he was, or how he got here. He only knew one thing: he had survived. And as long as he was breathing, he would fight. His senses, honed by a lifetime of war, stretched out. Amidst the chaos of the storm, he caught it, a flicker of civilization. A distant light, a smudge of land against the horizon. With a destination in sight, he began to move, running across the waves, his form a barely visible blur against the towering crests of water, a maelstrom of his own making against the rage of the sea. Nami hated the rain. It made her hair frizzy, her clothes damp and heavy, and most importantly, it made parchment maps delicate and prone to tearing. She clutched the stolen scroll to her chest, oilskin pouch it was wrapped in, providing a meager defense against the deluge. She scurried through the muddy streets of Shell's town, her movements silent and practiced, a shadow in the storm-drenched alleyways. This town was a pit. The air was thick with fear, a suffocating blanket woven by the man who ruled it. Captain, axe hand, Morgan. A man whose ego was as sharp and brutal as the weapon grafted to his arm. His marine base stood like a fortress of despair in the center of town, a constant reminder of who held the power. And inside that fortress was a vault that, according to her sources, contained not only a detailed map of the entire East Blue but also a significant amount of treasure the tyrant had extorted from the very people he was sworn to protect. She had the map. That was the prize. The treasure was just a bonus, another step towards her goal. 100 million berry. The price for her village's freedom. The price for Arlong's head. A bitter smile touched her lips. Every coin she stole, every lie she told, every risk she took was for them. For Belmere. She ducked into the relative shelter of a tavern's awning, wringing out the hem of her shirt as she scanned the street. The rain had driven most people indoors, but marine patrols still marched with a grim, joyless rhythm. They were just as much prisoners as the townspeople. She saw it in their eyes, the vacant, hollowed-out look of men who followed orders because the alternative was a meeting with Morgan's axe. A sudden commotion from the direction of the docks drew her attention. Shouts, not of anger, but of shock and disbelief. Curiosity, the thief's constant companion, tugged at her. Keeping to the shadows, Nami made her way towards the harbor. The storm was still raging, and the waves crashed against the seawall with enough force to make the stone tremble. And then she saw him. He was walking on the water. Nami blinked, rubbing the rain from her eyes, certain it was a trick of the light. A hallucination brought on by exhaustion and stress. But the image remained. A young man, no older than her, with sun-kissed blonde hair and a ridiculously bright orange outfit that was an affront to the storm's gloom, was striding across the violent surface of the sea as if it were solid ground. He wasn't just standing. He was walking, calmly, deliberately, towards the docks, the raging waves parting around him as if in deference to some unseen authority. The Marines at the docks were in an uproar, their rifles aimed with trembling hands, their shouts lost in the wind. The man didn't seem to notice them. His gaze was fixed on the town, a look of weary assessment in his incredibly blue eyes. He finally stepped onto the solid wood of the pier, water cascading from his clothes, yet he stood with an unshakable stillness that defied the chaos around him. "Identify yourself," a Marine lieutenant bellowed, his voice straining to sound authoritative. "You are trespassing on a world government facility." The blonde man's gaze finally settled on the soldiers. He didn't look intimidated. He didn't look hostile. He just looked tired. "I'm looking for a place to get a hot meal," he said, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the howl of the wind. Nami almost laughed. It was the most absurd thing she had ever heard. Here was a man who had just performed a miracle, defying the very laws of nature. And all he wanted was a bowl of soup. He was either an idiot or something else entirely. Her instincts, the ones that had kept her alive and one step ahead of the Marines for years, were screaming at her. This man was dangerous. He was a wild card, a disruption to the careful, precarious game she was playing. And he might just be the most useful person she had ever met. The lieutenant, emboldened by the man's simple request, puffed out his chest. "You are under arrest for illegal entry and suspicion of being a pirate. Surrender now." The man sighed, a sound of profound weariness. He raised a hand, not in surrender, but to scratch the back of his head. "Look, I don't want any trouble. He was cut off as the lieutenant gave the order to fire. The volley of rifle shots was deafening, the muzzle flashes stark against the gloom. Nami flinched, expecting to see the stranger torn apart. But he was gone. One moment he was there, the next he was standing directly behind the lieutenant, his hand resting gently on the man's shoulder. A collective gasp went through the assembled Marines. No one had seen him move. It wasn't speed. It was an absence of movement, a transition from one point to another that the eye simply couldn't follow. "I really hate it when people don't listen," the stranger said, his voice losing its earlier weariness, replaced now by a sharp, steely edge. He tightened his grip, and the lieutenant crumpled to the ground, unconscious but unharmed. The other Marines stumbled back, their faces pale with shock and fear. From her hiding spot, Nami's heart was hammering against her ribs. This wasn't a devil fruit power she recognized. It was something else, something raw and primal. The man looked at the remaining soldiers, and his blue eyes seemed to glow with an inner light. "Anyone else want to stop me from getting some ramen?" Silence. The only sound was the storm, which itself seemed to have quieted slightly, as if holding its breath. The Marines, utterly terrified, simply parted, creating a path for him into the town. The stranger gave a slight nod and began to walk, his stride unhurried, leaving a squad of armed soldiers frozen in his wake. Nami watched him go, her mind racing. The map in her pouch suddenly felt less important than the man who had just walked off the sea. Power like that could do more than just rob a vault. Power like that could topple tyrants. Power like that could free a village. She had to know more. With a newfound determination, she slipped back into the shadows, a hunter stalking a far more interesting prey. Naruto found a small, family-run restaurant that was, despite the storm and the oppressive atmosphere of the town, still open. The smell of broth and grilled meat was the first truly welcoming thing he had encountered in this new world. An elderly couple ran the place, their faces etched with lines of worry, but their eyes held a flicker of kindness when they saw him. He sat at the counter, dripping water onto the floor, and ordered 5 bowls of miso ramen. The old woman blinked at the order but shuffled off to the kitchen without a word. As he waited, Naruto focused, trying to make sense of his situation. His connection to the Nine Tails, to Kurama, was still there, a familiar, grumbling presence in the back of his mind. But it was distant, muted, as if separated by a veil. His own chakra felt strange, heavy, and sluggish, adapting to the foreign energy of this world. He was alone. The thought hit him again, a physical blow that left him breathless. Hinata, Boruto, Himawari, they were gone. Lost to him, on the other side of that tear in reality. A wave of grief so profound it threatened to drown him washed over, far more dangerous than the ocean he had just conquered. He clenched his fists on the counter. His knuckles white, fighting to keep the despair at bay. He had a promise to keep. He had promised them he would live. The first bowl of ramen arrived, and the simple, savory aroma was a tether to his past. A small comfort in the vast emptiness of his new reality. He ate with a hunger that was more than just physical, each bite a small act of defiance against the void. He was halfway through his third bowl when the door creaked open. A young woman with vibrant orange hair and a confident, almost predatory, grace stepped inside, shaking the rain from her coat. She scanned the room, her brown eyes sharp and intelligent, before they landed on him. Naruto felt her gaze. It was calculating, assessing, weighing his worth. He had felt similar gazes on the battlefield, but this one was different. It wasn't just measuring his strength, it was measuring his utility. She sauntered over and took the stool next to him, ordering a glass of orange juice. Walking on water, she said, her voice a low, casual murmur. That's a neat trick. New devil fruit. Naruto paused, his chopsticks hovering over the noodles. Devil fruit. He'd heard the term from the soldiers. Don't play dumb with me, she said, taking a sip of her juice. Her eyes never left his. You eat a devil fruit, you get a weird power, you can't swim. Simple. Except you were in the middle of the ocean during a storm. So which is it? Are you a liar, or are you something else? He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time. She was beautiful, but it was a sharp, dangerous beauty. There was a story in her eyes, a history of pain and struggle that he recognized all too well. He saw a survivor. It's not a devil fruit, he said simply, turning back to his ramen. And I wasn't lying. I really do want a hot meal. She let out a short, disbelieving laugh. You humiliate a squad of Marines, walk into a town run by a psychopath, and all you're after is dinner. Sorry, I don't buy it. Nobody comes to Shell's town for the food. So what's your game, Blondie? My name is Naruto. Nami, she replied instantly. Now, answer the question. What do you want here? Before Naruto could respond, the door to the restaurant flew open. Slamming against the wall, a group of Marines, these ones looking more confident and cruel than the ones at the docks, swaggered in. They were led by a tall, pompous, young man with a ridiculous bowl haircut and a smug sneer. There you are, the young man said, pointing a trembling finger at Naruto. That's him, the pirate who assaulted my men. Naruto recognized him. He was the one who had been hiding behind the lieutenant at the docks. The old couple running the restaurant shrank back, their faces pale with terror. Nami sighed, a sound of pure annoyance. ND discreetly slid a 3-section staff from her coat, holding it loosely under the counter. Helmeppo, Nami said, her voice dripping with disdain. Shouldn't you be at home, polishing your father's axe? Helmeppo's face flushed with anger. Shut up, thief. I'm here on official business. My father, Captain Morgan, wants a word with this criminal. He turned his sneer back to Naruto. You're to come with us. He'll make an example of you. He's got another pirate tied to a post in the courtyard. Maybe you two can keep each other company. Naruto's eyes narrowed. He'd had enough of bullies who used their father's name to terrorize others. Tied to a post? He asked, his voice dangerously low. That's right. The great pirate hunter, Roronoa Zoro. Helmeppo preened. He made a deal with me to protect a little girl and her mother. He has to survive a month without food or water. But my father thinks a public execution is much more dramatic. The casual cruelty in his voice ignited a familiar fire in Naruto's gut. The oppression, the abuse of power, the suffering of innocent people, it was a tale as old as time, a song he had fought against his entire life. He placed his chopsticks down neatly, stood up, and looked at Helmeppo, his blue eyes as cold as the sea in winter. No, Naruto said. Helmeppo blinked. What did you say? I said no, I haven't finished my ramen. And you're not taking me, or this, Zoro, person. Anywhere. He took a step forward. The Marines raised their rifles, but there was a new uncertainty in their eyes. They had heard the stories from the docks. They knew this wasn't an ordinary man. You can't defy my father. Helmeppo shrieked, a note of panic creeping into his voice. He's the law here. He's not the law, Naruto countered, his voice resonating with an authority that had nothing to do with rank or title. He's a thug, and I'm about to teach him, and you, a lesson about what happens when you push people too far. He vanished. Before any of the Marines could even process his disappearance, he reappeared in their midst. The movements were fluid, precise. A series of sharp, disabling strikes to pressure points, a blur of motion that left every soldier in the room collapsing to the floor in a groaning, unconscious heap. It was over in less than 3 seconds. Helmeppo stood alone, his jaw slack, his face a mask of abject terror. Naruto stood before him, not even breathing heavily. He hadn't used a Rasengan, not even a clone. It was simple, overwhelming taijutsu. The basics. It was all that was needed. Nami watched from her stool, her knuckles white where she gripped her staff. Her mind was reeling. The speed, the efficiency, the absolute confidence. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. This wasn't just power, it was mastery. Naruto grabbed the front of Helmeppo's frilly shirt, lifting him effortlessly off the ground. Take me to your father, he commanded, his voice a low growl. The lesson is about to begin. The courtyard of the Marine base was a monument to Morgan's ego. A massive statue of the captain himself stood in the center, axe arm raised in a triumphant pose. And at its base, tied to a wooden cross, was a man with green hair. His body scarred and emaciated. He was clearly in pain, but his eyes, when they flickered open, were sharp and defiant. This was Roronoa Zoro. Naruto strode into the courtyard, dragging a blubbering Helmeppo behind him. Nami followed at a distance, sticking to the shadows, her curiosity having now morphed into a full-blown investment in the outcome. She couldn't look away. Father, Helmeppo wailed as soon as he saw the towering figure of Captain Morgan emerge onto the balcony overlooking the yard. Father, help me, this monster. Morgan was an imposing man, his jaw literally made of steel. The enormous axe for a hand gleaming menacingly. He looked down at his sniveling son and the blond man holding him with an expression of pure contempt. Pathetic, Morgan boomed, his voice like grinding stone. You are a disgrace to my name. He dismissed his son's plight entirely, his cold gaze fixing on Naruto. So, you are the one causing trouble in my town. I am, Captain, Axe Hand, Morgan of the Marines. In the name of the world government, I sentence you to death. Naruto scoffed, shoving Helmeppo to the ground. The world government would be ashamed to have a pig like you in its ranks. This isn't a town, it's your personal piggy bank. And these aren't your soldiers, they're your slaves. It ends today. Morgan laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Bold words for a dead man. He leapt from the balcony, his huge frame landing with a ground-shaking thud. I will cleave you in two. He charged, swinging his axe in a wide, devastating arc designed to obliterate anything in its path. The air whistled. Nami held her breath. Zoro, on the cross, watched with a hawk-like intensity. Naruto didn't retreat. He didn't even flinch. As the axe descended, he moved. He flowed under the swing, his body impossibly low to the ground, and slammed the palm of his hand into Morgan's stomach. It didn't look like a powerful blow. It looked almost casual, but an invisible shockwave of pure energy erupted from the point of impact. Morgan's eyes bulged, the air was forced from his lungs in a strangled gasp, and his massive body was launched backwards, flying through the air as if hit by a cannonball. He crashed into the base of his own statue, shattering the stone and collapsing in a heap of broken pride and, likely, several broken ribs. The entire courtyard fell silent. The assembled Marines stared, their weapons forgotten, at the sight of their invincible captain defeated by a single, seemingly effortless blow. Naruto didn't spare Morgan a second glance. He walked over to the cross where Zoro was tied. You Roronoa Zoro? He asked. The green-haired man looked at him, a slow, grudging respect dawning in his eyes. Yeah, and who the hell are you? Naruto. He reached out and snapped the thick ropes binding Zoro's wrists as if they were thread. You hungry? I know a place with great ramen. Zoro staggered to his feet, rubbing his raw wrists. He looked from Naruto to the defeated Morgan. Then back again. A slow grin spread across his face. Anyone who punches a guy like that is all right by me. He stumbled but was caught by a figure emerging from the shadows. It was Nami. Easy there, hero, she said, helping Zoro stay upright. Her eyes, however, were on Naruto. The awe was plain on her face, mixed with a healthy dose of opportunistic calculation. From the ground, Morgan began to stir, pushing himself up with a roar of pure, undiluted rage. You will not make a fool of me, he bellowed, his face contorted. I am Captain Morgan. Naruto turned, an expression of profound annoyance on his face. You're just a bully, and you're done. He raised one hand, and with a silent puff of smoke, 2 identical copies of him appeared on either side. The 3 Narutos stood side by side, an impossible sight that broke the last vestiges of the Marines' courage. Before he could do anything more, a small figure darted out from the crowd of onlookers. Ayo! Young Marine with pink hair and round glasses, shaking from head to toe, stood between Naruto and the remaining soldiers. Please, stop, the boy cried. It's over. Captain Morgan has been abusing his power for years. We all knew it was wrong. Please, don't hurt anyone else. Naruto looked at the boy, Kobe, and saw not a coward, but a flicker of courage in the face of overwhelming fear. He let his clones disperse with a nod. Fine, but he said, pointing to Morgan, is your problem to deal with. The tide had turned. Inspired by Kobe's courage and the sight of their tyrant's defeat, the Marines. The real Marines who had joined to uphold justice, surged forward, arresting Morgan and his few remaining sycophants. The townspeople, who had been watching from their windows, began to pour into the streets. Their cautious silence breaking into a wave of jubilant cheers. As the celebration began to swell around them, Naruto, Nami, and a recovering Zoro slipped away, heading back towards the docks. The storm had broken, and the first rays of sunlight were piercing through the clouds, bathing the liberated town in a warm, golden light. They stood on the pier, the sea now calm and glittering. Nami looked at Naruto, her expression serious. The calculating glint was gone, replaced by something more genuine, more hopeful. You're not from around here, are you? She stated. It wasn't a question. Power like that, it doesn't exist in the East Blue. It probably doesn't exist anywhere. Naruto looked out at the horizon, at the endless expanse of blue. No, I'm not. What do you want, Naruto? She asked, her voice soft. You have the power to do anything. You could be a king, a warlord, anything. What is it you're looking for in this world? He was silent for a long moment, the cheers of the town a distant echo. The faces of his family, his friends, flashed through his mind. The ache of their loss was a physical thing. He had been a hero, a Hokage. He had saved his world. But that world was gone. Here, he was nothing, a ghost. But he was alive, and he needed a new purpose, a new direction. He thought of the pirates Morgan had mentioned, the adventure, the freedom. Maybe that was a path. A way to live, to fight, to find a new family. I'm not sure yet, he admitted, his voice raw with an honesty that surprised even himself. But I know I can't stand by and watch bullies run the world. I want to find a place where people can be free. Where they don't have to live in fear. He looked at the vast, open sea. Maybe a place like that is out there somewhere. Nami's breath hitched. His answer was so simple, so idealistic, so completely at odds with the cynical world she knew. And yet, looking at him, at the quiet strength in his eyes and the immense power she had just witnessed, she believed him. A brilliant, audacious idea sparked in her mind. It was a gamble, the biggest of her life. But with him, the odds suddenly seemed possible. The Grand Line, she said, her voice filled with a sudden, fierce energy. It's a sea of chaos, monsters, and legends. They say at its end is the greatest treasure of all, the One Piece. The man who finds it will become the Pirate King. Zoro, now leaning against a crate and looking much more steady, grunted. The Pirate King. Sounds like a good ambition for the world's greatest swordsman. Nami ignored him, her focus entirely on Naruto. To get there, you need a navigator. The best there is. Someone who can read the weather, the currents, the soul of the sea itself. Someone who can chart a course through the impossible. She took a step closer, her brown eyes locking with his blue ones. And you, she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "Need a crew. You need power, but you also need knowledge. You need a guide." She held out her hand. "My goal is to buy my village's freedom. For that, I need 100 million berry. Your goal is to find a place of freedom. It seems our paths are pointing in the same direction. Let's make a deal, Naruto. I'll be your navigator. I'll take you to the end of the Grand Line. In return, you help me get my treasure, and we build a crew that can make this world a place worth living in." Naruto looked at her outstretched hand. He saw the desperation in her eyes, but beneath it, he saw an iron will that matched his own. He saw a partner. He thought of his old team. Of the bonds forged in battle and shared dreams. He was alone, but maybe, he didn't have to be. A slow smile spread across his face, the first genuine smile he had managed since arriving in this strange new world. It was bright and full of a warmth that rivaled the morning sun. "All right, Nami," he said, taking her hand. His grip was firm, a silent promise. "You've got yourself a captain." Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Pirate Clown and the King of Snipers. The sea air, crisp and salty, was a welcome change from the lingering fear in Shell's town. Their vessel was small, a stolen caravel that was barely seaworthy. But it was theirs. Nami stood at the helm, her hand resting on the tiller with a familiar, confident touch, the stolen map of the East Blue spread out on a nearby barrel and weighted down with stones. The sun was warm on her face, and for the first time in a long time, the horizon looked less like an escape route and more like a promise. Zoro was asleep, leaning against the mast with his 3 swords cradled in his lap. The man was a paradox of lazy indifference and explosive readiness, and Nami found it both irritating and vaguely reassuring. Naruto, however, was a whirlwind of restless energy. He had explored every inch of the small boat within the first hour, asking 1,000 questions about sailing, navigation, and the strange, snail-like contraptions used for communication. Now, he was perched on the figurehead like a human gargoyle, staring out at the endless blue with an intensity that made Nami's skin prickle. He was thinking of his home. She knew it without having to ask. In his quieter moments, a profound sadness would settle in his eyes, a shadow that his bright smiles couldn't quite chase away. He was a man untethered from his entire world, a maelstrom of power and grief adrift in a foreign sea. It was this vulnerability, this crack in his otherwise unbreakable confidence, that made him approachable, human. It was also what made her wary. A man with nothing to lose was the most dangerous kind of man there was. "Land ho!" he shouted, his voice ringing with excitement, the shadow momentarily forgotten. Nami followed his pointing finger. A smudge of green and brown grew steadily larger on the horizon. She consulted her chart. "Orange Town," she announced. "Should be a decent place to stock up on supplies. Food, water, maybe some better rigging for this tub." "And ramen?" Naruto asked, appearing beside her so suddenly she jumped. "And ramen," she confirmed with a roll of her eyes. As they drew closer, a strange stillness became apparent. The port was active, with ships docked and crates piled high, but there were no people. No dockworkers shouting, no merchants haggling, no children playing. A single, garish flag flew. From the town's central tower, a skull with a big red nose, crossed not with bones, but with what looked like cannons. "That's not a marine flag," Naruto observed, his voice losing its cheerful edge. "No," Nami agreed, her hand instinctively going to the 3-section staff tucked into her belt. "It's a Jolly Roger. This town has already been taken." Before they could formulate a plan, a cannonball LL screamed through the air and crashed into the water just off their port bow, sending a geyser of saltwater onto the deck. The explosion jolted Zoro awake. "What was that?" he grumbled, his hand immediately on the hilt of his white sword. "Wado Ikimonji." Another cannonball followed, this one closer, rocking the small ship violently. On the docks, a group of flamboyantly dressed pirates were manning a cannon, laughing uproariously. Naruto's expression hardened. "They're just firing for fun," he said, his voice dangerously low. "They don't care who they hit." He looked at Nami. "Get us to the dock. I'll handle the welcoming committee." Nami didn't argue. She expertly maneuvered the caravel through the water, her focus absolute. As they neared the pier, Naruto crouched, chakra gathering in the soles of his feet. The moment the boat was close enough, he launched himself into the air, a silent, orange blur. The pirates on the dock were still laughing when he landed in their midst. The laughter died in their throats, replaced by stunned silence. "That wasn't very nice," Naruto said, a deceptively pleasant smile on his face. The largest of the pirates, a man with a lion tamer's mustache, snarled. "And who the hell are you? This is Orange Town, property of the great Captain Buggy. Scram before we blast you too." He never finished the sentence. Naruto moved, a flicker of motion too fast to track. One moment he was standing there, smiling, the next, every pirate on the dock was on the ground, groaning, their limbs twisted at angles that suggested they wouldn't be holding a cannon lighter for a very long time. It was over before Zoro had even managed to stand up straight and yawn. "Show off," Zoro muttered, stepping onto the dock. Nami was tying off the boat, her eyes scanning the deserted streets. "This is bad. A whole town, completely silent. This Captain Buggy must have them terrified." As if on cue, a man came running towards them, his face a mask of panic. He was stout, with a graying mustache, and wore the formal attire of a mayor. "Please, you have to leave," he gasped, skidding to a halt before them. "They'll see you. If Captain Buggy finds out you've harmed his men, he'll destroy the whole town." "He's already destroying it," Naruto countered, gesturing to the empty streets. "Where is everyone?" "Hiding," the mayor, whose name they learned was Boodle, explained, wringing his hands. "Ever since Buggy the Clown and his crew arrived, we've lived in fear. He thinks of himself as a grand showman. His whims are our laws, and his punishments are explosive." "Buggy the Clown," Nami repeated, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "I've heard of him. A pirate from the Grand Line, famous for his flashy exploits. They say he has a treasure map that charts a significant portion of the Grand Line's first half." Her interest was suddenly piqued, the glint of avarice returning to her eyes. She saw an opportunity. Naruto saw a problem. "So he's the one in charge," Naruto stated simply. "Where do we find him?" Boodle's eyes widened in horror. "You can't mean to confront him. He's a monster. He ate a devil fruit. They say no blade can cut him." Zoro's interest was now also piqued. "Can't be cut, huh?" he said, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. Ignoring Boodle's frantic protests, the trio started walking into the heart of the town. The silence was unnerving. Doors were shuttered, windows were barred. The only sound was the wind whistling through the empty streets, carrying the faint, tinny sound of circus music. It was coming from a large bar at the center of the main square. A building that had been converted into a makeshift circus tent. Naruto pushed open the swinging doors. The interior was a chaotic mess of garish decorations, stolen goods, and drunken pirates. In the center of the room, on a throne made of plundered treasure, sat a man with blue hair tied in pigtails, his face painted like a clown. A large, red, spherical nose sat in the middle of his face. This was Buggy the Clown. He was in the middle of telling a grandiose story to his crew, which included a slim man performing acrobatic feats and a hulking beast tamer with a massive lion. "And then I told Gold Roger himself, that treasure of yours is flashy, but not as flashy as me," Buggy boasted, letting out a braying laugh that his crew dutifully echoed. Naruto walked forward, stopping directly in front of the throne. The music screeched to a halt. All eyes turned to him. "Are you Buggy?" Naruto asked, his tone conversational. Buggy looked down his comically large nose at him. "That's Captain Buggy to you, you orange-clad pipsqueak. And who are you to so flashily interrupt my story?" "My name is Naruto Uzumaki," he said, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight. "I'm the man who's going to be the next pirate king." The entire room erupted in laughter. Buggy laughed the loudest, clutching his stomach as if he'd just heard the funniest joke in the world. "Pirate King, you, a scrawny brat in a jumpsuit. That's the least flashy thing I've ever heard. The Pirate King is a title for a man with flair, with style, with me. A real king doesn't need to terrorize a town full of innocent people to feel powerful," Naruto shot back, his eyes narrowing. "A real king protects them." The laughter stopped. Buggy's smile vanished, replaced by a look of murderous rage. "You dare to lecture me? Me, the man who sailed with the legendary Roger pirates." He stood up, drawing a set of wicked-looking daggers. For that insult, I'm going to make you disappear. Flashily, he threw the daggers. They flew through the air, aimed directly at Naruto's heart. Zoro's hand flew to his swords, but Naruto didn't move. He simply watched them come. At the last second, a whirlwind of compressed air erupted from his outstretched palm. Rasengan. It wasn't the planet-shattering version he could create, but a small, controlled vortex. The daggers were caught in its pull. Their trajectory altered, and they spun harmlessly into the wall behind him. Buggy stared, his jaw slack. What was that? A neat trick, Naruto said, echoing Nami's words from Shell's town. Now, you have two choices. You pack up your circus and you leave this town. Or I make you leave. Buggy's rage returned, tenfold. No one talks to me like that. Men, tear him apart. The Buggy pirates charged. It was a chaotic mess of swords, acrobatics, and the roar of Moji the Beast Tamer's lion, Richie. Zoro met the charge with a joyous laugh, his three swords a blur of silver steel. Nami used her staff with whip-like speed, creating a defensive perimeter around herself, felling pirates with precise, debilitating strikes. Naruto focused on Buggy. He shot forward, his fist cocked back. Buggy smirked. Blades don't work on me, and neither will your fists. Just as Naruto's punch was about to connect, Buggy's body split apart at the waist. His upper torso flew into the air, laughing maniacally. While his legs stayed planted on the ground, Naruto's fist passed through empty air. Behold the power of the chop fruit. Buggy cackled, his floating torso doing a little spin. I am a splitting human. I can't be cut, stabbed, or punched. To prove his point, his hands detached from his arms, each gripping a dagger, and flew towards Naruto from opposite directions. Naruto twisted, dodging one blade while slapping the other out of the air. This was new. He had fought opponents who could regenerate, who could turn to liquid, who could phase through matter. But a man Ho could willingly disassemble himself and control each part independently. This was just weird. Far away, on a quiet island carpeted in green, a young man with long, dark, curly hair and an even low Inger nose lay perched on the branch of a tall tree. He looked out over a peaceful village, a slingshot clutched in his hand. This was Usopp, and he was, in his own mind, Captain Usopp, the fearless leader of the Usopp pirates. A fearsome crew consisting of 3 small children who currently sat at the base of the tree, listening with rapt attention. And then, Usopp declared, his voice booming with fabricated authority. I stared down the giant goldfish whose dung was so large we mistook it for an island. With a single shot from my legendary slingshot, Usopp. The shriek cut through his tail. A young woman, pale and beautiful with blonde hair, was waving from the window of the largest mansion in the village. This was Kaya. Usopp's entire demeanor changed. The boisterous captain vanished, replaced by a flustered, love-struck teenager. Kaya, you shouldn't be out of bed, he shouted, scrambling down the tree. He spent every afternoon in her garden, telling her stories. Wild, unbelievable stories of adventure and daring. They were lies, of course, but they were good lies. They made her laugh, and her laughter was the most precious treasure in the world. It was a sound that had been all too rare since her parents had passed away. As he approached the mansion, a man in a butler's uniform stepped out onto the lawn. He was tall, thin, and adjusted his square glasses with a meticulous, almost sinister, slowness. This was Klahadore. He had been the family's butler for 3 years, a pillar of stability in Kaya's life. Usopp, Klahadore said, his voice smooth and cold. Your presence agitates Lady Kaya. Her health is fragile. I must ask you to cease these visits. But they make her happy. Usopp protested. What you think is irrelevant, Klahadore replied, his tone dismissive. You are a liar and the son of a worthless pirate. You are a blight on this village. Stay away from her. The words stung, as they always did. His father, Yasopp, had left to become a pirate and the crew of a man named, red-haired, Shanks. Usopp was proud of him, but the village saw him only as the abandoned son of a deadbeat. His lies were his shield, his escape. Dejected, Usopp retreated. Later that night, unable to sleep, he wandered near the edge of the forest that bordered the mansion's estate. He often did this, just to feel close to Kaya. It was then that he overheard 2 voices from the darkness of the beach. One was Clawhador, the other was a strange, lanky man with hypnotic circles on the palms of his hands. "The plan is set for tomorrow morning," Clawhador was saying, his voice stripped of its polished butler persona, replaced by a chilling, cruel rasp. "At dawn, the Black Cat pirates will attack the village from the north slope. We'll create chaos. In the confusion, I will have Kaya write a new will, leaving her entire fortune to me, her loyal butler, Clawhador. Then, she will have a tragic accident." The other man, Django the hypnotist, chuckled. "And what of you, Captain Kuro? Will you retire after this?" Kuro. The name sent a jolt of ice through Usopp's veins. Captain Kuro of the Black Cat Pirates. A man so cunning and ruthless that he had once faked his own execution to escape the Marines. Disappearing from the world. Clawhador was Captain Kuro. "I have grown weary of this charade," Kuro said, pushing his glasses up his nose with the palm of his hand, a strange, menacing habit. 3 years of playing the docile servant has been trying. But the wealth will be worth it. Tomorrow, this peaceful little village will run with blood, and I will be free." Usopp clamped his hands over his mouth to stifle a scream. His blood ran cold. This wasn't one of his stories. This was real. The monsters were real, and they were coming for Kaya. He stumbled back, a branch snapping under his foot. "Who's there?" Kuro's voice was sharp as a razor. Usopp didn't wait. He turned and ran, his heart hammering in his chest, the terrifying truth chasing him through the darkness. He had to warn someone. He had to warn the village. But who would believe him? He was Usopp, the liar. Back in Orange Town, the fight had devolved into a bizarre, chaotic ballet. Zoro was dueling Kabiji the acrobat, who rode a unicycle and breathed fire, his swordsmanship flashy but no match for Zoro's raw power and focus. Nami, meanwhile, had noticed Buggy's treasure being loaded onto a cart by his less than brave crew members. Seeing her chance, she disengaged from the fodder and began a stealthy pursuit of the real prize. Naruto was still dealing with Buggy himself. The CL's chop powers were more annoying than dangerous. Naruto was faster, stronger, and a far more skilled fighter, but landing a decisive blow was like trying to punch smoke. He'd aim for the head, and the head would fly off, cackling. He'd try a leg sweep, and the legs would jump over his own body. "It's useless." Buggy howled with glee, his various body parts floating around Naruto in a disorienting cloud. "You can't hit me. Now, witness my ultimate, flashy technique. Chop chop cannon." His feet stayed on the ground, but his entire upper body, hands gripping daggers, shot forward like a human cannonball. Naruto, tired of the game, decided to end it. As Buggy's torso rocketed towards him, he formed a familiar hand sign. Shadow Clone Jutsu. In a puff of smoke, a dozen Narutos appeared, surrounding Buggy's flying torso and his vulnerable feet on the ground. The floating Buggy screeched to a halt, his eyes wide with disbelief. What is this? More of your flashy tricks. You wanted a show," one of the clones said with a grin. "We'll give you a show." The clones attacked simultaneously. Some tackled his torso, others grabbed his hands, his head, his feet. They weren't trying to injure him. They were just grabbing him. The real Naruto walked up to the pile of his clones struggling with the various squirming parts of the pirate captain. "Let's see how you fight," Naruto said, "when you're all tied up." Using rope from a nearby crate, the clones efficiently tied Buggy's body parts together, his hands to his feet, his head to his torso, until he was a helpless, trussed-up, cursing ball of clown. Just as Zoro finally dispatched Kabiji and Nami had successfully liberated the treasure map from Buggy's fleeing subordinates, a deafening roar echoed through the town. Moji the beast tamer, seeing his captain defeated, had gone berserk. His lion, Richie, leapt forward, its massive jaws open wide, aiming for the helpless Mayor Boodle. Before anyone could react, Naruto was there. He appeared in front of the mayor, his back to the charging lion. He didn't even turn around. He just thrust his hand back, palm open. "Sage art. Frog Kata," he whispered. An invisible force, the very energy of nature, erupted from his palm and slammed into Richie's face. The massive lion stopped dead, its eyes rolling back, and it crumpled to the ground, unconscious, without a single visible scratch. Moji stared, dumbfounded, before fainting from sheer shock. The fight was over. The remaining buggy pirates, seeing their captain and top officers defeated so utterly, threw down their weapons and surrendered. As the townspeople began to emerge from their homes, their fearful silence turning into cheers, Nami rejoined them, tucking the rolled-up map into her shirt. "Got it," she said with a triumphant grin. "Good," Naruto said, turning to Boodle. "The town is yours again." But Boodle was looking at the sky, his face pale with a new terror. Look, floating high above the town was Buggy's head, which had apparently escaped the binding in the chaos. His face was a mask of pure, vindictive fury. "If I can't have this town, no one can," he shrieked. "I've saved my most special, most flashy surprise for last." Fire the buggy ball. In the distance, on a small hill overlooking the town, his crew had set up an enormous cannon. A massive cannonball, painted with Buggy's own Jolly Roger, was loaded and fired. It flew through the air, trailing smoke, a harbinger of total annihilation. It was large enough to wipe out half the town in a single blast. Panic erupted. The townspeople screamed and ran. Nami and Zoro looked at the incoming projectile with grim acceptance. There was nowhere to run. Naruto just looked up. "I'm getting really tired of this clown," he said. He browed his hands together in a cross-shaped seal. Multi-shadow clone jutsu. The world exploded in puffs of white smoke. Not a dozen, not 100, but 1,000 Narutos appeared, filling the entire town square. The sheer scale of it was breathtaking. Nami and Zoro stared, their jaws hanging open. This wasn't a trick. This was an army. "All right, guys," the original Naruto yelled. "Plan G." The clones roared their assent. Half of them formed a massive, multi-layered human pyramid directly in the path of the buggy ball. The other half swarmed towards Buggy's cannon crew on the hill, a tidal wave of orange that moved with terrifying speed and purpose. The buggy ball slammed into the pyramid of clones. The impact was immense, the explosion deafening. But the clones held. Dozens were vaporized in the blast, but more took their place. Absorbing the kinetic energy, slowing the projectile until it finally stopped, inches from the first buildings, held aloft by 100 straining Naruto Uzumakis. They then carefully lowered the massive, unexploded cannonball to the ground. On the hill, the cannon crew was overwhelmed in seconds. High above, Buggy's floating head could only watch in impotent horror. Naruto, the real one, located Buggy's still tied-up body, picked it up, and looked up at the head. "I think this belongs to you," he said. With a flick of his wrist, he threw the body into the air with impossible strength and accuracy. It flew hundreds of feet, reconnecting with the head with a comical whump. Gravity reasserted itself, and the complete, though still tied up, Captain Buggy plummeted from the sky, screaming all the way, until he landed on a distant, tiny island with a small splash. As the 1,000 clones dispersed into smoke, leaving only the original, the town fell silent once more. But this was not a silence of fear. It was a silence of pure, unadulterated awe. They stared at the lone blonde man standing beside the dormant buggy ball, and then, as one, they erupted into a cheer that shook the very foundations of their newly liberated homes. Later, as they were restocking their ship with supplies gifted by the grateful town, Nami looked at Naruto, who was happy. Why devouring a bowl of ramen Boodle had insisted on making for him. "You know," she said, leaning against the rail, the new map clutched in her hand. "You said you wanted to be the Pirate King. I thought you were joking." Naruto looked up from his noodles, a bit of broth on his chin. "Why would I joke about that? Because it's impossible," she said. "To conquer the Grand Line, to find the One Peak. It's a dream that has consumed and destroyed the greatest pirates in the world." "Well," Naruto said, taking another loud slurp of noodles, "I've always been good at making the impossible possible." He gave her a wide, confident grin. "Believe it." Nami found herself smiling back. Maybe, just maybe, she did. They set sail under a clear sky, leaving a cheering orange town behind them. Nami unfurled the new map, her eyes tracing the route into the most dangerous sea in the world. "Next island on this course is a quiet little place," she noted. "Syrup Village. Should be a good place to find a bigger ship and maybe a proper shipwright." Naruto and Zoro nodded, looking forward to the next adventure. They were unaware of the frantic, terrified boy on that very island, a boy who had just run into his village square, screaming about pirates and murder, only to be met with the scorn and disbelief of the people he was desperately trying to save. Usopp was alone, and the monsters were coming at dawn. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Liar's Truth and the Butler's Plan. The lie died on Usopp's lips. It had started as a roar, a desperate, frantic warning that echoed through the peaceful morning streets of Syrup Village. Pirates are coming. A whole crew. They're going to kill everyone and burn the village. He had run until his lungs burned and his legs ached, his mind replaying the chilling conversation he'd overheard on the beach. Clawhador was Captain Kuro. The monster was already inside the walls. But as he stood in the market square, gasping for breath, his warning was met not with alarm, but with the one sound he dreaded more than anything in the world: laughter. "Good one, Usopp," the butcher called out, wiping his hands on his apron. "You've outdone yourself this time," the baker's wife added, shaking her head with a weary smile. "Pirates, really? My Usopp pirates will fight them off," one of the village children shouted, brandishing a wooden sword, completely missing the genuine terror in his idol's eyes. "It's not a lie this time," Usopp pleaded, his voice cracking. "I swear, I heard him. Clawhador, the butler at the mansion, he's Captain Kuro. He's going to kill Kaya." The laughter stopped, replaced by a cold, hard anger. To lie about pirates was one thing. The village had grown accustomed to his fanciful tales. But to slander the respectable Mr. Clawhador and involve the beloved, fragile Lady Kaya was another matter entirely. It was a line crossed. "That's enough, Usopp," the mayor said, his voice stern. "You're upsetting everyone. Go home. We've had enough of your stories for one day." He was brushed aside, ignored, his truth dismissed as the most outrageous fiction he'd ever concocted. The boy who cried wolf. He saw it in their eyes, the pity, the annoyance, the complete and utter disbelief. Defeated, he stumbled away from the village, the weight of their scorn heavier than any physical blow. He was alone. The wolf was coming, and he was the only one who knew. The truth was his burden, and it was going to get them all killed. The small caravel slid gracefully into the quiet cove, the water as calm and clear as glass. Nami breathed a sigh of relief. After the chaos of Orange Town, the tranquility of Syrup Village felt like a blessing. It was a quaint, peaceful place, with windmills turning gently in the sea breeze and tidy houses nestled in rolling green hills. "Doesn't look like there are any clowns or axe-handed tyrants here," Naruto observed, hopping onto the shore. "Smells nice." "It smells like a good place to find a real ship," Nami said, her eyes already scanning the coastline for signs of a shipyard or a wealthy-looking vessel ripe for the acquiring. "We can't sail the Grand Line in this leaky bucket." Zoro had already found a sunny patch of grass and was leaning against a rock, his eyes closed. "Wake me when it's time to fight or eat." Their search for a vessel led them to the grandest structure on the island, a sprawling mansion perched atop the highest hill, overlooking the entire village. "Now that's what I'm talking about," Nami said, her eyes gleaming. "People with a house that big usually have a yacht to match. Let's go ask for a donation." "You mean, steal it?" Zoro grunted without opening his eyes. "Borrow it, permanently," she corrected. As they approached the long, winding path that led to the mansion, they saw him. A young man with a ridiculously long nose was running back and forth along the shoreline below the path, frantically scattering caltrops and digging shallow pits. He was muttering to himself, his movements jerky and panicked. "The oil slick on the slope should slow them down," he mumbled, wiping sweat and tears from his face with a dirty rag. "And these caltrops, maybe they'll trip. And then the great Captain Usopp will finish them with his special attack, the deadly star of certain doom." He held up his slingshot, his hand trembling so badly he could barely aim it at a piece of driftwood. Naruto stopped, his head cocked to the side. He watched the boy for a moment, a flicker of something, recognition, perhaps empathy, in his eyes. He saw not a fool, but a soldier, terrified and outmatched, preparing to defend his home alone. When the long-nosed boy finally noticed them, he yelped and fell backward into one of his own shallow pits. He scrambled out, pointing his slingshot at them with a shaking hand. "Halt," he squeaked, trying to puff out his chest. You've trespassed on the territory of the great Captain Usopp. State your business before I and my arm. Why of 80 million followers unleash our fury upon you? Zoro opened one eye. 80 million. Nami just sighed. Looks like we found the village idiot. Naruto ignored them and walked forward, his hands held up in a placating gesture. We're not here to cause trouble. We're just looking for a ship. Usopp's eyes darted between the three of them. The green-haired man bristling with swords, the tough-looking girl with the staff. The blonde kid in the bright orange jumpsuit who seemed to radiate an unnerving level of confidence. They looked like pirates. They had to be more of Kuro's crew. Lies. Usopp shouted, his voice cracking. You're with him, aren't you? You're here for Kaya. Well, you'll have to get through me first. I am a warrior of the sea. My bounty is higher than all of yours combined. Naruto stopped a few feet from him and looked him directly in the eye. The frantic energy, the wild boasts, the trembling hands, he'd seen it all before in young shinobi on their first mission. Trying to mask their terror with bravado, he decided to cut through the noise. You're scared, Naruto said, his voice quiet but firm. It wasn't an accusation. It was a simple statement of fact. Usopp froze. The word hit him harder than any punch. The bluster, the lies, the carefully constructed persona of Captain Usopp evaporated, leaving only a terrified boy, trembling on a beach, trying to hold back the tide with his bare hands. They're coming at dawn, Usopp whispered, the fight draining out of him. His slingshot drooped. He's going to kill her. He's going to kill everyone. And nobody believes me. Tears welled in his eyes, cutting clean tracks through the dirt on his face. Nobody ever believes me. He told them everything. The words tumbled out of him in a frantic, desperate rent. About Klahadore being the infamous Captain Kuro of 100 plans, about the plot to assassinate Kaya and steal her fortune, about the imminent invasion by the Black Cat pirates. Nami listened with a frown, her arms crossed. A notorious pirate captain posing as a butler for 3 years, just to inherit a fortune. It sounds convoluted and convenient. How do we know this isn't just another one of your stories? Because I heard him. Usopp insisted, his desperation returning. I swear on my mother's grave, it's the truth. Just this once, it's the truth. Naruto didn't need any more convincing. He could see the truth in the boy's terror. He understood what it felt like to carry a burden no one else could see, to scream a warning that no one would hear. I believe you, he said. Usopp stared at him, his mouth agape. 2 simple words, spoken with absolute certainty. 2 words he had been longing to hear his entire life. Inside the mansion, Kaya coughed into a silk handkerchief. He sat propped up by pillows in her opulent bedroom, a book lying open but unread in her lap. Klahadore stood by the window, looking out over the grounds, a tray with her medicine on the table beside him. You seem distracted today, Klahadore, she said, her voice soft and weak. My apologies, Lady Kaya, he replied, his voice the epitome of calm professionalism. I was just concerned. That Usopp boy was in the village again, spreading more of his vile rumors. This time, about me. He means no harm, Kaya said, a faint smile touching her lips. His stories are his way of connecting with a world he feels distant from. A world his father left him for. Klahadore adjusted his glasses, sliding them up the bridge of his nose with the palm of his hand, the gesture precise and practiced. A cold, thin smile touched his lips. A smile Kaya couldn't see. Perhaps. But lies, no matter how well-intentioned, can be dangerous. They can poison the trust people have. They must be excised. He turned from the window, picking up the medicine. It is time for your dose. It will help you sleep. The medicine was a sedative, designed to keep her weak, compliant. Tonight's dose was stronger. It would ensure she was deeply unconscious when the unfortunate accident occurred. Later, after Kaya was asleep, Kuro met his first mate, Django the hypnotist, in the mansion's study. The lanky man was swaying on the spot, a sharp, chakram-like pendulum swinging from his fingers. Is everything prepared? Kuro asked, his voice a low, menacing hiss. The crew is anchored on the north shore, just as you planned, Captain Kuro, Django reported. They are eager for some plunder. The village sleeps. No one suspects a thing. At the first light of dawn, we attack the north slope. Excellent, Kuro said, a rare, cruel smile gracing his features. He looked at a portrait of Kaya's parents hanging over the fireplace. 3 years. 3 years of feigning loyalty, of servitude, of cloying pleasantries. 3 years of suppressing the urge to simply slit their throats. It has been the most difficult plan I have ever executed. But the reward will be peace. A life free from the chase, free from the name, Captain Kuro. And a mountain of berry, Django added with a grin. That too, Kuro conceded. He pushed his glasses up his nose again. My plans are perfect. They never fail. By sunrise, this charade will be over, Kaya will be dead. And the Black Cat pirates will have vanished once more, leaving only a tragic tale of a bloody pirate raid behind. He was a man of meticulous detail, of flawless strategy. There were no variables he hadn't accounted for. He was certain of it. On the quiet, sleeping island of Syrup Village, there was no one who could possibly stand in his way. Absolutely not, Nami said, her arms crossed. Her foot tapping impatiently. They were huddled behind a rock on the beach, out of sight of the mansion. This is not our problem. We came here for a ship, not to place. I hero for a village of ingrates who won't even listen to one of their own. We grab a vessel and we go. Let the Black Cat pirates have this place. But Kaya, Usopp started, his face aghast. Is not our responsibility. Nami cut him off. Her voice cold. Look, I'm sorry for what's happening to you, I really am. But my life has taught me one thing. You look out for yourself, because no one else will. Going up against a famous pirate crew for zero profit is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I'm in, Zoro said, stretching his arms. He had listened to the whole story with a bored expression. But the name, Captain Kuro, had sparked his interest. A captain known for his flawless plans sounds like a challenge. I want to see if my blades can't add a flaw or two. Nami shot him a glare. You just want to fight. And you just want money, Zoro retorted. At least my motivation is pure. They both looked at Naruto. He had been quiet throughout the argument, his gaze fixed on Usopp. He saw the boy's shaking hands. The terror in his eyes, but also the fierce, desperate resolve to protect the people and the place he loved, even if they didn't love him back. It was a feeling Naruto knew down to his very bones. It was the will of fire. We're staying, Naruto said. The decision was instantaneous, absolute. His voice held no room for debate. What? Nami exclaimed. Are you crazy? Why? Naruto turned to her, his blue eyes holding a clarity and conviction that silenced her protests. Because he asked for our help. Because a whole village of people is going to die if we do nothing. Because I told you I want to create a world where people don't have to live in fear. That doesn't just mean finding some magical island at the end of the sea. It means starting right here, right now. He looked back at Usopp. Your fight is our fight now. Nami stared at him, a whirlwind of conflicting emotions swirling within her. His idealism was infuriating, naive, and completely at odds with her cynical worldview. It was also magnetic. It was the same unwavering conviction that had liberated Shell's town. She thought of her own village, living under the thumb of a tyrant. If someone with Naruto's power had shown up, had offered to fight their battle, what would she have given for that? She let out a long, frustrated sigh, running a hand through her orange hair. Fine, she muttered, fine, but if I die, I'm going to come back and haunt you. And you owe me, big time. A wide, grateful smile broke across Usopp's face. For the first time all day, a glimmer of hope pierced through his despair. He wasn't alone anymore. The strategic meeting that followed was short and to the point. Usopp, now energized, became their expert. There's only one place they can attack from without being seen from the village, he explained. Drawing a crude map in the sand. The North Shore. It's a narrow, winding slope, slick with oil from the shipyard runoff. It's treacherous. They'll be focused on their footing. It's the perfect place for an ambush. So we don't let them get past the slope, Zoro said with a grin, tapping the hilt of his sword. It's the only way, Usopp agreed, his face grim. We have to stop them there. If even one of them reaches the village, the alarm will be raised, and Kuro's plan will fall apart. He'll go straight for Kaya. We have to hold that line. The plan was simple, desperate, and hinged entirely on the four of them holding off an entire pirate crew. As the last vestiges of twilight faded from the sky, they made their way to the northern slope. It was just as Usopp had described, a steep, narrow incline of dark, slick rock that snaked down to a small, hidden beach. The air was thick with the smell of oil and salt. Below, the sea was calm, black, and silent. The village behind them slept on, blissfully unaware of the thin, ragged line of defenders that stood between them and annihilation. Usopp laid down on the cliff edge, peering into the darkness, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Nami stood a few feet back, her staff held in a white-knuckled grip, her face a mask of nervous tension. Zoro sat cross-legged, meditating, his 3 swords laid across his lap. An island of lethal calm in the sea of suspense. Naruto stood at the very top of the slope, looking out at the dark water. He could feel the anticipation in the air, the familiar thrum of an impending battle. He thought of Usopp, the liar who was risking his life for a truth no one would believe. He thought of his own past, of the promises he'd made to people he loved. This world was different, the enemies were new, but the fight was always the same. "They're here," Usopp whispered, his voice trembling. In the distance, a black flag was rising against the moonless sky. A ship, silent and dark, was gliding towards their shore. The Black Cat pirates had arrived. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Battle for the Slope. Dawn was a promise the sky had not yet kept. In the pre-dawn gloom, the world was painted in shades of charcoal and deep indigo. The only sounds on the northern shore were the gentle lapping of waves and the frantic, shallow breaths of a single, terrified lyre. Usopp lay flat on the cold, oily rock, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Every shadow seemed to move, every whisper of the wind sounded like a footstep. Then, he saw it. A longboat, a black silhouette against the slightly less black water, was scraping against the sand of the hidden beach. Figures, dark and silent, began to disembark. There were dozens of them. A cold dread, sharp and debilitating, washed over him. His muscles locked. His elaborate plan, his boasts of holding the line, all of it felt like a child's fantasy in the face of this silent, professional menace. He couldn't do this. He was just Usopp, the liar. A hand settled on his shoulder, firm and steady. He looked up to see Naruto crouching beside him, his expression calm, his blue eyes seeming to cut through the darkness. "You're the first line of defense, Usopp," Naruto said, his voice a low whisper that carried no judgment, only expectation. "You're the lookout. You're our cannon. We're holding this slope, and it starts with you. Show them what a warrior of the sea can do." Naruto's belief was a shield, a borrowed strength that pushed back the tide of fear. Usopp took a deep, earing breath and looked back down the slope. The pirates were assembling at the base, their swords and axes gleaming faintly. The lanky hypnotist, Django, was at their head, looking up the dark incline as if it were a minor inconvenience. Usopp's trembling fingers found a pellet in his satchel. He loaded his slingshot, the familiar way to small comfort. He was still terrified, but he wasn't alone. He pulled the band back, the rubber groaning in the silence. He took aim. "They're coming," he whispered. "Let them." Zoro's voice rumbled from behind him, the sound of a sword being drawn from its sheath punctuating the sentence. Django pointed up the slope. "The village is just beyond this rise," he announced to his men. "Move quickly, move quietly. Kill anyone you see. Our captain's plan is perfect. Let's not disappoint him." The Black Cat pirates began their ascent. They moved with a stealthy confidence, their feet slipping slightly on the slick, oil-coated rocks. They were halfway up Usopp let his breath out in a rush and released the band. The pellet flew true, a small, dark blur against the nascent dawn. It wasn't an ordinary stone. It was a custom-made projectile, a shell packed with foul-smelling, concentrated pepper. "Lead star," Usopp yelled, the shout more for his own courage than for any tactical reason. The pellet shattered against a rock in the center of the advancing group. A cloud of acrid yellow powder exploded outwards. The pirates in the immediate vicinity choked, their stealthy advance turning into a cacophony of coughing, spluttering, and curses. Their eyes streamed, their quiet infiltration shattered. What was that? Ambush. Before they could recover, another shot rang out. This time, it was a small, hard ball of iron. It struck one of the pirate squarely in the forehead with a sickening crack. The man went down without a sound, his fall causing two of his blinded comrades to lose their footing and tumble back down the slope in a clatter of armor and limbs. The ambush was sprung. Nami and Zoro moved up to the edge of the cliff, flanking Usopp. Not bad. Long nose, Zoro admitted, a predatory grin on his face. See, Naruto said, clapping Usopp on the back again. Cannon. The pirates, recovering their senses, let out a collective roar of anger and charged up the slope, their stealth abandoned for brute force. Zoro met them head-on. He was a dervish of steel and intent. With a sword in each hand and the white hilt of Wado Ikimonji clenched in his teeth, he became a living wall. His blades sang, deflecting axes, parrying swords, and striking back with a speed and power that sent his opponents reeling. The narrowness of the slope worked to his advantage, preventing the pirates from swarming him. He was a one-man bottleneck, and the toll to pass was paid in blood. Nami was a different kind of fighter. She wasn't a wall, she was a hornet. She darted along the edge of the fight, her three-sectioned staff a blur. She never stayed in one place, using her agility to exploit the treacherous footing that the pirates struggled with. A precise jab to a knee, a sharp crack to an elbow, a sweeping strike that sent a charging pirate sliding helplessly down the oily rocks. She was a master of tactical disruption, disabling her opponents with an efficiency that was as beautiful as it was brutal. Usopp, emboldened, became their artillery. He fired shot after shot from his vantage point. An exploding star, filled with gunpowder and glass shards that sent pirates scrambling for cover. A smoke star that shrouded a section of the slope in thick, disorienting smoke, allowing Zoro to press his advantage. He was no longer just a liar telling stories, he was creating a new one, written in gunpowder and steel. From the base of the slope, Django watched the assault stall, his expression one of bored annoyance. His crew was being held, routed even, by two swordsmen, a girl with a stick, and a boy with a slingshot. It was an insult to Captain Kuro's perfect plan. Incompetent fools, he muttered, raising his chakram. It began to swing back and forth, a gleaming, hypnotic pendulum. I suppose I'll have to give them some encouragement. 1, 2, Django. He chanted, his voice echoing up the slope. A strange thing happened. The pirates who had been hesitating, who had been cowed by Zoro's ferocity, suddenly stopped. Their eyes glazed over. They stood up straighter, their grips on their weapons tightening. A low growl rumbled through their ranks. Then, they charged again. But this time, it was different. They felt no pain. A deep cut from Zoro that should have ended a man's fight was ignored. A blow from Nami's staff that should have broken a wrist was shrugged off. They had become berserkers, puppets of pure strength, driven by Django's hypnotic command. They're not stopping, Nami shouted, narrowly dodging a wild axe swing from a pirate with a glassy, unfocused stare. Even Zoro was being pushed back, his defense strained by the sheer relentless force of the hypnotized crew. What did he do to them? He grunted, parrying a clumsy but powerful blow that sent shivers up his arm. Naruto had seen this before. A mental attack, an illusion to overwrite will. It was a crude form of genjutsu. He formed a simple hand seal, a surge of his own chakra disrupting the foreign influence that was trying to creep into his own mind. The world sharpened back into focus. He looked at his friends. Zoro was fighting through it with sheer, bloody-minded stubbornness, while Nami was smart enough to avert her gaze from the swinging chakram and focus on the immediate threat. But they couldn't hold forever. Usopp, target the guy with the weird ring. Naruto commanded. Zoro, Nami, buy him some time. He then turned his attention to the hypnotized pirates. He wasn't going to kill them. They were victims as much as assailants. He shot forward, a blur of orange weaving through the chaos. He didn't use punches or kicks. He used precise, open-palmed strikes to the neck and chest of each pirate. A jab here, a chop there. One by one, the berserkers dropped, not dead, but unconscious, the hypnotic spell broken as their bodies shut down. As Naruto thinned the ranks, two figures shot past the front line with astonishing speed. They moved on all fours, their movements sinuous and feline. They were the Nyaban brothers, Siam and Butchi, Kuro's personal enforcers. They ignored Naruto, their target clearly Zoro, the biggest physical threat. We'll take care of the swordsman, Siam, the leaner of the two, hissed. They attacked in concert, their claws, long steel blades attached to their gloves, flashing in the dim light. Zoro found himself in a true fight. The brothers were fast, agile, and their coordinated attacks left no openings. While he blocked Siam's high attack, Butcher would slash at his legs. They were wearing him down, landing shallow cuts, trying to bleed him out. Seeing Zoro occupied, Django smirked and began to advance up the slope himself. His crew reforming behind him. The line was about to break. "Oh no, you don't!" Usopp yelled. He had a clear shot at Django. He fired his slingshot, a simple lead ball aimed for the hypnotist's head. But Django was no mere fodder. He swayed to the side, the pellet whistling past his ear. He then broke into a bizarre, loping run, his movements jerky and unpredictable. He was moonwalking up the hill. He's dancing, Nami said, utterly bewildered. A moving target is harder to hit, Naruto noted, appreciating the strange but effective tactic. He looked at the chaos. Zoro locked in a desperate battle with the Nyaban brothers, Nami and Usopp trying to fend off the advancing Django and his hypnotized grunts. He had to end this now. Shadow clone jutsu. In an instant, 20 Narutos appeared on the slope. The effect was immediate and decisive. Half the clones surged towards Django's crew, a wave of orange that crashed into them, overwhelming them with sheer numbers. The other half raced to aid Zoro. The Nyaban brothers suddenly found themselves fighting not one swordsman, but a swordsman backed by 10 identical, fist-swinging maniacs. Their coordination shattered. As Siam was forced to dodge a punch from a clone, Zoro saw his opening. Onigiri. He lunged forward, his 3 swords crossing in a devastating, X-shaped slash. Siam was thrown back, a deep gash across his chest. Butcher roared in anger and tried to attack Zoro from behind, only to be met with a Rasengan from a Naruto clone that sent him flying into a rock wall, knocking him out cold. Meanwhile, the original Naruto confronted Django. The hypnotist tried his swaying pendulum trick again. 1, 2, he never got to finish. Naruto was in front of him in a flash, his hand grabbing the chakram, stopping it dead. Django's eyes widened in shock. "My tricks don't work on you," Naruto said, his voice cold. He flicked his wrist, and the chakram flew from Django's grasp. A single, sharp blow to the stomach, and the hypnotist folded, gasping for air before collapsing. The battle for the slope was over. The Black Cat pirates lay scattered, unconscious or groaning, from the top to the bottom of the incline. Usopp stood, his slingshot smoking, his face a mixture of terror, exhaustion, and a dawning sense of triumph. Nami leaned on her staff, breathing heavily. Zoro stood over the defeated Nyaban brothers. Blood dripping from a dozen minor cuts, but his posture was victorious. They had done it. They had held the line. A slow, deliberate clapping sound echoed from the top of the slope behind them. They turned. A tall, slender man in a butler's uniform stood there, adjusting his square glasses with the palm of his hand. It was Clawhador, Captain Kuro. He looked down at the scene of utter carnage, at his entire crew defeated, and there was no shock on his face. There was only a cold, simmering rage. "In 5 minutes, he said, his voice a low, chilling monotone, "my crew was supposed to have secured the village. It has now been 20. My plan, my perfect, flawless plan, is 15 minutes behind schedule." He looked not at Naruto or Zoro, but at his own defeated men. Quote, "And it is all because of the incompetence of this worthless trash." He vanished. He didn't run. He simply disappeared from his spot and reappeared in the middle of his fallen crew, a silent, black blur of motion. There was no sound, only the faint whisper of air being displaced. Then, screams. He moved among his own men, his hands lashing out. 5 of his pirates, men who had been starting to stir, suddenly had deep, bloody gashes appear on their bodies before they fell silent for good. He was killing his own crew for failing him. He reappeared at the top of the slope, not a drop of blood on his pristine uniform. He pushed his glasses up his nose. "When a tool is broken, you discard it," he stated, his voice devoid of all emotion. "Now then, I suppose if I want this plan to be executed correctly, I will have to do it myself." The sun was just beginning to crest the horizon, casting long, menacing shadows down the slope. The real monster had finally shown its face. Chapter 4 End. Chapt. R5. The butler's blade and the liar's resolve. The sun's first true rays spilled over the horizon, bathing the carnage on the slope in a harsh, revealing light. The air was cold, but Captain Kuro's presence was colder. He stood with an unnerving stillness, a predator who had shed his disguise and found the world wanting. The dead and unconscious bodies of his own crew littered the ground around him. A testament to his chilling brand of perfectionism. A plan is a beautiful thing, Kuro said, his voice a soft, cultured monotone that was more terrifying than any shout. It is a series of calcula. 10 steps leading to a predetermined outcome. My plan to acquire Lady Kaya's fortune was flawless. It accounted for every contingency, every variable. He paused, his dead eyes sweeping over them. Except this one, a swordsman with some renown, a thief with a stick, a local liar. He finally settled his gaze on Naruto. And you are an anomaly, an unforeseen error that has corrupted the entire equation. Usopp swallowed hard, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. Your plan is over, Kuro. We beat you. We beat your whole crew. Kuro's lips twitched in something that might have been a smile, but it held no warmth. It was the grimace of a mathematician finding a flaw in his proof. You beat a collection of blunt instruments. I am the scalpel. He pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose with the heel of his palm. And it is time for the final incision. He vanished. There was no burst of speed, no blur of movement. He was simply there one moment, and gone the next. The only evidence of his passage was the sound of air being sliced apart in the 5, razor-thin lines that appeared simultaneously on the rock face where Nami had been standing a split second before. She had thrown herself to the ground on pure instinct, the wind from the attack cold on the back of her neck. Zoro's eyes widened, his head snapping around, trying to track a target that wasn't there. Where did he? Kuro appeared behind him. He wasn't running, he was simply there. His hands, now fitted with gloves tipped with long, sword-like blades, the cat claws, were already swinging. Zoro spun, his 3 swords a desperate, clanging wall of steel that barely intercepted the 10-bladed assault. Sparks flew. The force of the blows was staggering, driving Zoro back a step, his arms vibrating from the impact. Fast. Zoro grunted, his teeth clenched. This wasn't just speed, it was a complete absence of wasted motion. Kuro didn't press the attack. He was gone again, a phantom in a butler's suit. He reappeared at the base of the slope, his back to them. This is my Shikushi, he explained to the empty air, as if lecturing a class. The out-of-the-bag attack. My speed is such that I myself cannot always perceive what I am cutting. It is of no consequence. I simply need to eliminate the area in which my targets exist. He proved his point by disappearing again. A terrifying crisscross pattern of deep cuts appeared across the entire width of the slope, shredding rock and earth. Naruto had grabbed Usopp and Nami, pulling them into the air in a single, chakra-fueled leap, narrowly avoiding the attack that would have sliced them into ribbons. They landed hard, scrambling for footing on the slick ground. This was a different level of threat. Morgan was a brute. Buggy was a gimmick. Kuro was a silent, calculating killer whose primary attribute was something even Naruto's enhanced senses had trouble following. We can't even see him. Nami yelled, her face pale. If you can't see him, you can't fight him. Usopp shrieked, firing a desperate shot from his slingshot that hit nothing but empty air. Naruto's eyes narrowed. He closed them, shutting out the confusing visual information. Kuro was fast, impossibly fast. But he still had to move from point A to point B. He still had a presence. Naruto pushed out with his own senses, feeling for the flicker of intent, the disturbance in the air. The faint hum of a living being moving at incredible velocity. He felt it, a spike of killing intent. But it wasn't focused. It was diffuse, spread out over a wide area. Kuro wasn't aiming for them. He was aiming for the space they occupied. He's moving so fast, he's attacking blind. The realization hit Naruto like a lightning bolt. It was the flaw in the perfection. He's just mowing the lawn. Naruto shouted. He doesn't know where we are. He's just attacking where he thinks we should be. Scatter. As he said it, Kuro unleashed another silent, sweeping attack. But this time, forewarned, they were already moving. Zoro leapt left, Naruto pushed Nami right, and Usopp dove behind a large boulder. The cat claws tore through empty space, carving deep gouges into the earth where they had just been standing. Kuro reappeared, his posture unchanged, his breathing even. He adjusted his glasses. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. His attack had missed. The plan was deviating. The sound of the battle, a cacophony of clanging steel and shouting, finally pierced the sedative-induced fog in Kaya's mind. She awoke with a gasp, her head throbbing. Her room was filled with the gray light of dawn. The fighting was real. It was close. She stumbled out of bed, her legs weak and unsteady. The medicine Clawhador had given her had left her frail, but a surge of adrenaline cut through the weakness. She pulled on a robe and hurried out of her room, her heart pounding with a fear she didn't understand. In the main hall, she found the mansion's other servant, Mary. The man with the strange, sheep-like hair was peering nervously out a large window that overlooked the northern coast. "Mary, what is happening?" Kaya asked, her voice trembling. "Lady Kaya, you shouldn't be out of bed," he cried, turning to her with a look of panic. There are people fighting on the slope. That boy, Usopp, is with them." Kaya pushed past him to the window. The sight below stole her breath. The slope was a disaster zone, scarred and torn as if by a giant beast. She saw Usopp, hiding behind a rock. She saw the orange-haired girl and the green-haired swordsman, both looking battered. She saw the man in the bright orange jumpsuit who seemed to be at the center of their defense. They were fighting against a single figure, a man who moved like a ghost. Then, the figure stopped, and the morning light caught him just right. The pristine butler's uniform, the square glasses, the cold, precise posture. Clawhador, she breathed, the name a knot of ice in her stomach. And in that instant, everything Usopp had said, every frantic warning the village had dismissed as a lie, crashed down upon her with the force of absolute, undeniable truth. The man she had trusted, the man who had cared for her for 3 years, was a monster. And Usopp, the boy she had thought a gentle, harmless liar, was fighting to protect her. He was telling the truth, she whispered, her hands flying to her mouth. All this time, he was telling the truth. A new strength, born of guilt and a fierce, sudden anger, surged through her. "Mary," she said, her voice hard as steel. "We have to do something." "He's getting frustrated," Naruto called out. Kuro's attacks were becoming wider, more frantic. He was sacrificing his lethal precision for raw, destructive coverage, carving up more and more of the slope in his attempt to catch them. "That doesn't make him any less dangerous," Zoro retorted, panting. Dodging the attacks was taking a toll. It was a battle of attrition, and Kuro didn't seem to be tiring. They needed to stop him. Not just dodge him. They needed to make him stop moving. "Usopp," Naruto yelled, "do you have anything that's messy?" Usopp, still behind his rock, fumbled in his pouch. "Messy. I've got oil stars. Smoke stars. Perfect. The oil. Nami, the caltrops. Throw them everywhere." Understanding dawned on their faces. Nami immediately emptied her pockets, scattering the sharp, multi-pronged jacks across a wide section of the slope. From his cover, Usopp started launching pellets that burst on impact, spreading slicks of thick, black oil over the rocks. The stage was set. "Hey, glasses," Naruto bellowed, stepping out into the open. "Your plan is a failure. You're not perfect, you're just a fast coward who kills his own men." The taunt worked. Kuro's head snapped towards Naruto, his face a mask of cold fury. The insult to his perfection was the one thing he could not tolerate. "You will be erased," Kuro hissed. He disappeared. He moved in a straight line towards Naruto, his claws outstretched, ready to tear him to shreds. But he was moving blind, his rage overriding his already limited senses. His first foot came down on a patch of fresh oil. He slipped. His second foot landed on one of Nami's caltrops. He roared in pain, a sound of pure shock, his flawless composure finally breaking. His trajectory was ruined, his balance shattered. He stumbled, careening wildly across the slope, a pinball of flailing blades. "Now," Naruto yelled. Zoro was already moving, his swords a blur. He wasn't aiming for Kuro, but for his path, anticipating where his uncontrolled slide would take him. Three-sword style. Tiger hunt. He lunged, a whirlwind of spinning steel that intercepted the tumbling butler. The impact was brutal. Kuro's cat claws shattered against Zoro's swords, and the swordsman's powerful slash sent Kuro flying, crashing into the base of the cliff with enough force to crack the stone. Kuro lay in a broken heap, his uniform torn, his glasses shattered. He pushed himself up, trembling not from injury, but from pure, seething rage. His plan, his life's work of control and perfection, had been dismantled by a group of misfits and a patch of oil. It was inconceivable. This isn't over, he snarled, staggering to his feet. I will kill the girl myself. I will. He was cut off by a voice from the top of the slope. Clawhador. It was Kaya. She stood there, her face pale but her eyes blazing with a righteous fury. Mary stood beside her, holding a decorative flintlock pistol from the study, though his hands were shaking too much to aim it properly. Kuro froze, looking up at her, his primary objective, his entire reason for being on this island. It is over, Kaya said, her voice ringing with an authority he had never heard from her before. You have failed. That was the final blow. To be told by the very pawn he had spent 3 years manipulating that he had failed. His mind snapped. With a guttural roar, he lunged, ignoring Naruto and Zoro. Scrambling up the slope with a final, desperate burst of speed, his one remaining claw aimed directly at Kaya's heart. Usopp saw it. He saw the monster he had warned everyone about. To murder the girl he had sworn to protect. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach. But something else was there too, resolve. He was not the boy who cried wolf. He was the shepherd who stood his ground. You're not touching her, he screamed. He didn't have a lead pellet loaded. He didn't have an exploding star. He had the special ammo he'd been saving for a grand finale. He aimed, and in that instant, his hand was as steady as the rock he hid behind. Special attack. Ketchup star. The pellet flew, faster than his usual shots. It struck Kuro square in the face. It wasn't a weapon. It was a fragile shell filled with thick, red ketchup. The impact was negligible, but it completely blinded Kuro, his world turning into a smear of sticky, red paste. He was still moving, a blind missile of rage. But Naruto was already there. He appeared in front of Kaya in a silent flicker, a simple, immovable wall. He caught Kuro's clawed hand, his grip like iron. Game over, Naruto said quietly. He spun, using Kuro's own momentum against him, and hurled him back down the slope. Kuro tumbled end over end, finally landing in an unconscious heap amongst the bodies of his defeated crew. Silence descended. The battle was won. The sun was fully risen now, casting a golden light on the scene. The villagers, finally roused by the prolonged conflict, began to appear at the edge of the forest. Their faces a mixture of confusion and awe. They saw the defeated pirates, the scarred battlefield, and Usopp, standing tall, his slingshot still aimed at the fallen monster. They saw the lie made truth. Kaya slowly walked down the slope, her eyes never leaving Usopp. She stopped in front of him, the boy who had been her secret friend, her storyteller, her unlikely guardian. You saved me, she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. You saved all of us. Usopp's bravado returned, a comforting shield for his overwhelming emotions. He struck a pose, puffing out his chest. Of course, I am Captain Usopp, warrior of the sea. A few dozen pirates are no match for me and my crew. He glanced at Naruto, Nami, and Zoro, a genuine, heartfelt smile breaking through his facade. Later, after the Marines had been called from a neighboring island to round up the unconscious pirates, the group stood in the mansion's large study. Kaya, now dressed properly, addressed them with a formal grace. I owe you a debt I can never truly repay, she said, but I would like to try. She gestured for Mary to open a large set of double doors leading to a balcony. Please, accept this as a token of my gratitude. Beyond the balcony, moored in the private cove below the mansion, was a ship. It was beautiful, a 3-masted caravel with sleek lines and, most notably, a custom-carved figurehead in the shape of a smiling sheep's head. Her name is the Going Mary, Mary said proudly, tears in his eyes. I helped design her. She's the finest ship of her class. Nami's eyes were as wide as saucers. She ran to the balcony, drinking in the sight of the vessel. It was perfect, more than perfect. It was a real ship, a ship capable of sailing the Grand Line. As Naruto and the others admired their new vessel, Usopp made a quiet announcement. I'm dissolving the Usopp pirates, he said to the 3 children who had been his loyal followers, who had now come to see him off. They began to cry, but he held up a hand. A captain must follow his dream, he said, his voice gaining strength. He turned to Naruto. My dream is to become a truly brave warrior of the sea, just like my father. A master SN. Ipper whose name is known across the world. To do that, I have to go out there. To the real sea. He took a deep breath. So, will you let me join your crew? Naruto looked at the liar who had told the truth, the coward who had been brave. The boy who had defended his home alone. He saw a kindred spirit. He broke into a massive grin. Welcome aboard, Usopp, he said, extending a hand. We could use a good sniper. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Floating Restaurant and the World's Greatest Swordsman. The going merry was a marvel. To Naruto, who was used to traveling on foot or via giant, chakra-infused toads. The feeling of the deck rising and falling with the rhythm of the sea was a constant, thrilling novelty. The ship was more than just wood and canvas, it had a personality, a cheerful, born spirit embodied by the smiling sheep on its figurehead. It was their home. Their departure from Syrup Village had been bittersweet. Kaya and Mary had stood on the cliffs, waving until the island. D was just a speck of green on the horizon. Usopp's 3 young pirates had wailed, promising to guard the village in their captain's absence. Usopp himself had stood at the stern, back turned to the island. Not wanting them to see the tears in his eyes. He had only looked forward when the shore was completely gone, his expression a mask of grim determination. He was a warrior of the sea now, and warriors didn't look back. Life on the sea quickly fell into a routine. Nami was the undisputed master of the ship, her voice sharp and clear as she barked orders about rigging and trimming sails, a nautical map seemingly imprinted on the inside of her eyelids. Zoro found his preferred napping spot in the crow's nest, claiming the altitude helped him watch for enemies, though his snores suggested otherwise. Usopp, when not tinkering with his slingshot or telling outrageously exaggerated tales of his past exploits, proved to be a surprisingly adept cannon operator and lookout. Naruto, for his part, was the engine. When the wind died, a few well-placed shadow clones could man the oars for hours without tiring. If a sail needed to be adjusted at the top of the mast, he could simply run up the side of it. He was the solution to every physical problem, his energy as boundless as the ocean itself. He was in the middle of a heated fishing competition with Usopp, Naruto using a simple line. Versus Usopp's newly invented, auto-baiting fish catcher 5000, when Nami slammed her fist on the ship's railing. That's it, I can't take it anymore, she declared, her stomach rumbling audibly. What's wrong, Nami? Naruto asked, reeling in a piece of seaweed. What's wrong is that we have a state-of-the-art kitchen and our diet consists of fish, hardtack, and whatever fruit we managed to grab from the last island, she fumed. Zoro tried to cook last night and nearly burned the galley down trying to boil water. We need a cook, a real sea cook. Usopp nodded sagely. A pirate crew is only as strong as its chef. It's a well-known fact. I once sailed with a cook who could make a 7-course meal out of nothing but barnacles and salt water. Zoro, from his perch, cracked an eye open. We're out of booze, too. See. Nami gestured wildly. This is a crisis. We need a cook, and we need one now. She pointed to a spot on her chart. According to this, there's a rumored floating restaurant out in this sector. The Barati. It's a long shot, but it's the only civilization for 50 miles. The idea of a restaurant in the middle of the ocean was strange enough to capture everyone's interest. They adjusted their course, and within a few hours, a bizarre sight greeted them. It was a massive ship, shaped like a giant fish, complete with fins and a tail. Music and the savory smell of cooked food drifted across the water. Whoa, Naruto breathed, his eyes wide. A fish restaurant that's also a fish. As they drew closer, they saw that the clientele was a mix of wealthy merchants, a few off-duty marines, and a smattering of individuals who looked suspiciously like bounty hunters. The Barati was neutral territory, a place where food was more important than allegiances. They had barely docked when the trouble started. A marine lieutenant with an iron jaw, though far less literal than Morgan's, was loudly berating a young man with blonde hair, a peculiar curly eyebrow, and a cigarette dangling from his lips. The blonde man was dressed impeccably in a black suit. "This soup is disgusting," the Marine, a man named Full Body, declared. "I found a fly in it. Do you know who I am?" The blonde man took a long, slow drag from his cigarette and exhaled a plume of smoke. "No, and I don't particularly care. You ordered the soup, you pay for the soup." His voice was calm, almost lazy, but had an undercurrent of steel. Then he saw Nami step off the Mary's gangplank. His entire demeanor changed in an instant. His eyes turned to hearts, and he moved towards her in a swirl of motion that was almost a dance. "A goddess," he cooed, taking her hand and dropping to one knee. "An angel has descended from the heavens to bless this humble restaurant with her beauty. My name is Sanji. May I have the honor of seating you, my sweet Nami Swan." Nami, taken aback but not entirely displeased by the flattery, simply blinked. Zoro grunted in disgust. Usopp looked on with awe at the man's sheer audacity. Full Body, enraged at being ignored, stood up and kicked his chair back. "How dare you turn your back on me? I am Lieutenant Iron Fist Full Body." He drew back his fist, which was indeed covered by a metal gauntlet. He swung at Sanji. Sanji, without ever taking his eyes off Nami, simply lifted his leg. His black-trousered shin met Full Body's fist with a crack of metal on bone. Full Body howled in pain, cradling his shattered gauntlet. Sanji didn't even seem to notice. He smoothly transitioned the block into a fluid, elegant kick that sent the lieutenant flying across the deck and into a pile of tables. "One should never be rude to a lady," Sanji said coolly, before turning his hard eyes back to Nami. "A special drink for the beautiful mademoiselle, on the house." Naruto watched the entire exchange with a thoughtful expression. The man was a strange mix of lovesick fool and lethal fighter. But what caught Naruto's attention was the way he had kicked. He had used only his legs, his hands remaining casually in his pockets. It was a deliberate choice, a specific fighting style. Their meal was interrupted by the arrival of another man, this one ragged and starving. He was a pirate, his clothes torn, his face gaunt with hunger. He stumbled onto the deck and collapsed, begging for food. The other cooks, a rough-looking bunch of ex-pirates themselves, moved to throw him out. "We don't serve freeloaders," one of them, a burly man named Paddy, sneered. "Especially not broke pirates." But Sanji stopped them. He disappeared into the galley and returned with a plate of hot food and a glass of water. He placed it in front of the collapsed pirate. "Eat," he said simply. The pirate, whose name was Jin, devoured the food with tears streaming down his face. The other cooks were furious. "What are you doing, Sanji? That's one of Don Krieg's men. The most infamous and brutal pirate fleet in the East Blue. You feed one, and the rest will follow." "Then I'll feed them too," Sanji replied, lighting another cigarette. "It's a cook's job to feed the hungry. Anyone. I don't care who they are." The words resonated with Naruto. It was a simple, unshakable conviction, the kind he understood and respected. He was starting to like this strange, kicking cook. As if on cue, Jin, having regained his strength, fulfilled Paddy's prophecy. He stood up, a grim look on his face. "Thank you for the food. I will never forget this kindness," he said to Sanji. Then he fired a signal flare. Minutes later, the horizon darkened. A massive, wrecked galleon, its sails in tatters and its hull pocked with cannonball holes, limped towards the Bharati. It was a ghost ship, crewed by the dead and the dying. At its helm stood a man in ornate, golden armor, a fearsome-looking gas mask covering his face. This was Don Krieg, a man who ruled his 5,000-man pirate fleet through overwhelming firepower and sheer brutality. His ship scraped against the side of the Bharati, and Krieg himself, weak and starving but still radiating an aura of menace, stepped onto the restaurant's deck. "Food," he rasped, his voice metallic through the mask. "Give us food, and then we'll be taking your ship." The owner of the Bharati, a short, peg-legged man with a ridiculously long, braided mustache, stepped forward. He was Red Leg, Zeph, a former pirate captain and Sanji's mentor. "Feed him," Zeph commanded his cooks, his voice a gravelly bark. Despite their protests, they complied. Krieg and his 100 or so surviving crew members were fed. And just as Jin had done, Krieg repaid the kindness with betrayal. As soon as his strength returned, he slammed his armored fist on the table. "This restaurant is now the property of the Krieg pirates," he declared. His men, now revived, drew their weapons. The patrons and marine diners screamed, scrambling to get away. Zeph just sighed, as if this was a mild inconvenience. "You pirates are all the same. No gratitude." The cooks of the Bharati, however, were not ordinary chefs. They were all former pirates and bounty hunters Zeph had taken in. They grinned, pulling out their own weapons, giant meat cleavers, spiked knuckles, even pan flails. The restaurant deck erupted into a full-scale brawl. Nami, ever the opportunist, immediately began securing the wallets of the fleeing patrons, while Usopp took a position on the Mary's railing, providing surprise. Ingly effective sniper support with his pepper stars and smoke bombs. Naruto and Zoro stood back to back, easily fending off the Krieg pirates that came their way. "This is getting interesting," Zoro said with a grin, deflecting a sword thrust. "Just another Tuesday," Naruto replied, disabling 3 pirates with a single, sweeping kick. Sanji was a whirlwind of black-suited motion, his kicks flowing into one another in a deadly dance. He moved with a dancer's grace and a killer's efficiency, his hands never leaving his pockets. He and Zeph fought side by side, a seamless duo of devastating kicks. The Krieg pirates were numerous, but they were no match for the combined force of the Straw Hats and the Fighting Cooks. It was then that the world changed. The galleon, Krieg's massive flagship, suddenly groaned. A sound like a giant tearing sheet of paper echoed across the sea. And then, the ship simply split. A massive, impossibly clean cut ran from its bow to its stern, and the two halves of the colossal vessel slid apart and sank into the depths of the ocean. Everyone stopped fighting. They stared in stunned silence at the spot where the galleon had been. In its place was a tiny, fin-shaped boat with green flamed candles at its prow. A single man sat in it, a ridiculously large, cross-adorned sword strapped to his back. He wore ornate, dark red clothing, and his eyes, a piercing, predatory gold, seemed to see through everything. Don Krieg began to tremble. His arrogance, his brutality, all of it evaporated, replaced by a primal, abject terror. It's him," he stammered. "The man who destroyed our entire fleet, on his own." The man in the boat looked at the chaotic scene on the Bharati with an expression of profound boredom. "I was merely killing time," he said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone. Zoro's breath hitched. His hand, which had been resting casually on his swords, now gripped them with a white-knuckled intensity. His whole body was trembling, but it was not with fear. It was with a wild, ecstatic excitement. He knew who this was. Every swordsman in the world knew. "Dracul Mahawk," Zoro breathed, his voice filled with reverence and awe. "Hawk Eyes, the world's greatest swordsman." Mahawk's golden eyes flickered over the crowd, dismissing them all as insects, until they landed on Zoro. He saw the 3 swords, he saw the look in the young man's eye. And a flicker of mild interest disturbed his otherwise placid features. Zoro didn't hesitate. He tied on his black bandana, a ritual that signaled he was serious. He stepped forward, leaving the brawl behind him. The other pirates, recognizing the gravity of the moment, scrambled out of his way. "I've sailed the seas for one reason," Zoro declared, his voice ringing with conviction. "To find you." Mahawk raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "And what do you want with me, boy?" "To challenge you for your title," Zoro roared, drawing his 3 blades. A long silence. Then, Mahawk let out a soft chuckle. It was not a mocking sound, but one of genuine, if weary, amusement. "You challenge me, a brave, but foolish, frog in a well. You do not yet know the vastness of the sea." "That may be," Zoro said, settling into his Santoryu stance. "But I made a promise. I will not lose." With a battle cry, he charged. The fight, if it could be called that, was over before it began. Mahawk didn't even draw his massive sword. Instead, from a chain around his neck, he drew a tiny, dagger-like blade no bigger than a dinner knife, shaped like a cross. He met Zoro's 3-sword assault with that single, tiny blade. He parried every one of Zoro's techniques with an effortless grace. The tiger hunt, the demon bull, all of Zoro's strongest attacks were deflected with a flick of the wrist. Mihawk wasn't just stronger, he was in a different dimension of skill. Naruto watched, his fists clenched. He could feel the power radiating from Mihawk. It wasn't loud or explosive like his own chakra. It was a quiet, immense pressure. A weight on the world itself. It was the absolute, soul-crushing confidence of a man who knew he was the best. For the first time since arriving in this world, Naruto was looking at someone and had absolutely no idea how he would even begin to fight him. Mihawk, with a final, casual parry, left Zoro wide open and stabbed the small dagger into his chest. Not deep, but deep enough. Zoro coughed up blood, his eyes wide with disbelief at the impossible gap in their abilities. "What is your goal?" Mihawk asked, his voice calm. "Why do you seek the throne of the strongest?" "For a promise to a friend," Zoro gasped, his strength failing. Mihawk pulled the blade out. "A noble goal. Unlike the others." He took a step back. "I am Dracula Mihawk. State your name, warrior." "Roronoa Zoro," he grunted, staggering but refusing to fall. "I will remember it," Mihawk said. "And as a courtesy from one swordsman to another, I will use this, the world's strongest black blade, to end you." With a sound like a sigh, he drew the massive sword from his back. Yuru. Its blade was black as night, impossibly long and curved. The pressure in the air intensified tenfold. Zoro knew he was defeated. He knew he was about to die. But he sheathed his two lesser swords and held Wado Ikimonji out in front of him. Then, he turned around and spread his arms wide, his chest completely exposed. Mihawk paused. "What is this?" "Scars on the back," Zoro said, a bloody grin on his face, "or a swordsman's shame." Mihawk's lips curled into a genuine smile. "Well said." He swung. The massy, black blade cut a devastating diagonal slash across Zoro's chest, from his left shoulder to his right hip. The blow was immense, lifting Zoro off his feet and sending him flying backwards into the sea. As Zoro sank into the blue depths, his life flashing before his eyes, his last conscious thought was a desperate apology to the blonde man who had become his captain. "Naruto, did I fail you?" But Naruto was already moving. He had been a silent, coiled spring throughout the entire duel. The moment Zoro hit the water, he exploded into action. He was in the sea in an instant, pulling his Grievo USLY wounded crewmate from the water and back onto the deck. Sanji and Usopp rushed to his side, trying to staunch the bleeding. Naruto laid Zoro down gently, then stood up and faced Mihawk. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, his blue eyes no longer bright and cheerful, but as cold and deep as the ocean floor. The air around him began to crackle, a faint, visible shimmer of orange energy. The pressure Mihawk exuded was met by a wild, untamed power that felt like a raging sun. Mihawk looked at Naruto, his interest piqued for the second time that day. He saw not a swordsman or a brawler, but something else entirely. A force. "You are his captain." "Yes," Naruto said, his voice dangerously quiet. Mihawk considered him for a long moment, his golden eyes unreadable. Then he sheathed Yuru. "He has a good captain. It is too soon for you to die, Roronoa Zoro," he called out to the unconscious swordsman. "Grow strong. Surpass me. I will be waiting at the top of the world." With that, he turned, stepped back into his small boat, and drifted away as silently as he had come, leaving a scene of chaos, a terrified Don Krieg, and a pirate crew whose entire perception of the world had just been shattered. Zoro stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He looked up at Naruto, tears of shame and pain streaming down his face. He raised his one good arm into the air, his voice a hoarse, broken whisper. "Naruto, can you hear me?" Naruto knelt beside him. "I hear you, Zoro." "I'm sorry," Zoro choked out. "I lost. From now on, until the day I defeat him and become the world's greatest swordsman, I will never lose again." "Do you have a problem with that, Pirate King?" A slow, proud smile spread across Naruto's face. He placed a hand on Zoro's shoulder. "No, not a single problem." The bond between them, forged in battle and shared dreams, had been tempered in the fires of absolute defeat and reforged into something unbreakable. But the immediate problem remained. Don Krieg, seeing his primary threat depart, began to laugh. His confidence returning. "The hawk has flown away," he bellowed. Now, this restaurant is mine. Naruto stood up, cracking his knuckles. He looked at the armored tyrant, and then at his wounded friend. The cold fury in his eyes had not subsided. You're in my way, he said. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The cook's dead and the pirate king's fury. The world had narrowed to the space between two men. On one side, Don Krieg, a walking arsenal encased in golden Wirtz steel, the embodiment of power through overwhelming force. On the other, Naruto Uzumaki, a lone figure in tattered orange. His only weapon the quiet, simmering rage in his eyes. The chaos of the brawl around them faded into a background hum. Mihawk was gone, but the void he'd left behind had been filled by a different kind of pressure. A gathering storm of furious, protective energy. So, the hawk flew away and the little sparrow thinks he can chirp, Krieg sneered, his voice metallic and distorted through his mask. He raised a massive, armored gauntlet. You saw what true power is. That man was a monster. But he's gone. And I am still here. This sea, this restaurant, it all belongs to me. Men, kill them all. Take everything. The remaining Krieg pirates, shaken but obedient, raised their weapons. The Baratie cooks braced themselves for another charge. No, Naruto's voice was soft, yet it cut through the din like a razor. He took one step forward, and the deck boards groaned beneath his feet. The air around him shimmered, the orange glow from the fight with Mihawk returning, hotter and more intense. He wasn't looking at the pirate fodder. His gaze was locked on Krieg. Your fight is with me, Naruto stated. Let them go. If you're the captain, if you're the one in charge, then prove it. Or are you just a coward who hides behind his men and his toys? Krieg let out a grating laugh. A challenge. From a whelp who probably can't even lift my spear. Fine, I'll show you the difference between a real pirate warlord and a child playing games. I will demonstrate my power so utterly that your crew will beg to serve me after I've crushed your skull. He unslung a massive, ornate spear from his back. It was a weapon designed for sinking ships, not for dueling. He stomped his foot, and a section of his golden shoulder pad clicked open, revealing a row of small, gray spheres. Let's start with a little something to clear the air, Krieg chortled. He plucked one of the spheres and hurled it into the middle of the deck. It burst with a sickening hiss, releasing a thick, purple cloud of gas. It's MH5, one of the cooks screamed in terror. Poison gas. Everyone, get back. Patrons and pirates alike scrambled, coughing, their faces turning pale with fear. But Sanji was prepared. He and the other cooks produced gas masks from their jackets, pulling them on with practiced speed. Sanji tossed one to Naruto. Naruto simply waved it away. He looked at the expanding cloud of poison, then at Krieg. He took a deep, deliberate breath, held it, and formed a single hand sign. Wind style. Great breakthrough. He exhaled, but it was not a normal breath. It was a focused, controlled gale. A miniature hurricane that erupted from his lips. The gust of wind was so powerful it tore the poison cloud from the deck, shredding it and sending it harmlessly out to sea. It slammed into Krieg, who had to brace himself with his spear to keep from being blown off his feet. His cape whipped violently behind him. The deck was clear. The poison was gone. Naruto stood exactly where he had been, not a single hair out of place. He hadn't even needed the mask. Krieg stared, his metallic jaw slightly agape. What kind of trick was that? Just breathing, Naruto replied flatly. He vanished from his spot. He reappeared directly in front of Krieg, his fist cocked back. Krieg, despite his shock, was a veteran of the Grand Line. His reflexes were sharp. He brought up his left arm, which was covered by a large, diamond-patterned shield. A foolish move. This shield is as hard as diamond. Your hand will shatter. Naruto's fist slammed into the shield. It did not shatter, but the sound of the impact was like a thunderclap. A visible shockwave radiated outwards, cracking the deck boards in a perfect circle around them. Krieg's entire body was jolted, his feet lifting from the ground. The shield itself held, but the arm holding it was not as strong. There was a sickening crunch of breaking bone. Krieg roared in pain, stumbling back, his shield arm hanging uselessly at his side. He stared in disbelief at the blonde kid who hadn't even flinched. My arm. You talk too much about your toys, Naruto said, his voice still chillingly calm. He advanced. Desperate, Krieg triggered another mechanism. A dozen small barrels popped out from his armor, all aimed at Naruto. Then take this. Firing squad. The barrels unleashed a hail of iron bullets. But Naruto was already a blur. He moved like a leaf in the wind, flowing between the projectiles, the bullets peppering the deck and mast behind him, none of them finding their mark. He appeared at Krieg's side, his leg sweeping out. It wasn't a kick meant to injure. It was a simple, disarming motion. It hooked behind Krieg's massive spear, yanking it from his grasp and sending it clattering across the deck. In the space of 30 seconds, Naruto had neutralized Krieg's poison gas, broken his shield arm, and disarmed him of his primary weapon, all without showing a hint of strain. The remaining Krieg pirates, who had been watching with arrogant smirks, were now pale with a dawning horror. Their invincible captain, the man of 1,000 weapons, was being systematically dismantled. Krieg, now panicked, ripped off his broken shield and threw it aside. He revealed his last resort, a flamethrower built into his other gauntlet. He blasted a torrent of fire at Naruto. Naruto simply held up his hand. A swirling, blue sphere of pure energy, the size of a grapefruit, materialized in his palm. Rasengan. He met the jet of fire with the spinning ball of chakra. The two forces collided. The Rasengan did not overpower the fire, it absorbed it, drawing the flames into its vortex before snuffing them out completely. Naruto stood in the embers, holding the still humming sphere. Is that all? That was when Krieg did the one thing that changed the entire dynamic of the fight. Backed into a corner, his weapons useless, his body broken, he lunged not for Naruto, but for the closest, most vulnerable target. The one who represented the heart of this place. He grabbed Red Leg Zeph. He locked his good arm around the old chef's neck, holding a small, hidden blade to his throat. Nobody move, Krieg shrieked, his voice cracking with desperation. One more step and the old man dies. I'll still get this ship. Everything stopped. Sanji, who had been watching Naruto's display with a stunned awe, froze, his cigarette dropping from his lips. The fight, the bravado, all of it drained from his face, replaced by a raw, primal fear. Old man, he screamed. Zeph didn't struggle, he just looked at Krieg with an expression of weary contempt. This is a new low. Even for you. Krieg ignored him, his eyes fixed on Naruto and Sanji. I won. You can't touch me. The ship is mine. Naruto looked at Sanji's face, at the sheer terror in his eyes. It was more than just concern for his boss. It was the look of a man about to lose his entire world. And in that moment, the memory of another kitchen, another storm, another act of impossible sacrifice, rose to the surface of Sanji's mind. Flashback. The sea was a monster. Not a living thing, but a force of pure, mindless chaos. The passenger ship Orbit was a toy in its grip, tossed and broken by waves the size of mountains. A 9-year-old Sanji, a galley apprentice with big dreams and a bigger mouth, was sliding across the flooded kitchen floor, screaming. He had dreamed of the all-blue, a mystical sea where all the fish from the 4 oceans gathered. It was a chef's paradise, a fairy tale the other cooks mocked him for. He had sworn he would find it. Now, he was going to drown, his dream a bitter joke. A wave, black and colossal, crashed over the ship, splintering it like firewood. Sanji was thrown into the churning, freezing water. His small body had no chance against the current. He was pulled down into the dark. Then, a hand grabbed his. Strong, rough. He was pulled upwards, towards a piece of floating wreckage. It was the head chef of the pirate ship T had raided them just before the storm hit. The captain with the braided mustache and the fearsome reputation. Red Leg, Zeph. But Zeph was different now. He had saved him. A pirate had saved him. They washed up on a rock. A barren, lifeless spire of stone jutting out of the endless ocean. There was no vegetation, no animals, no fresh water. Just them, the sky, and the sea. Zeph had salvaged a small sack of food from the wreckage. He gave a tiny portion to Sanji. The rest, a much larger bag, he kept for himself. We must ration this, Zeph had said, his voice a low rasp. Sit on your side of the rock and watch for ships. Don't waste your energy. Days turned into weeks. The sun beat down. Their throats were parched, their stomachs a constant, gnawing agony. Sanji finished his tiny bag of food in a few days. Zeph, on the other side of the rock, remained still, his large bag untouched beside him. The hunger became a living thing, a beast inside Sanji that clawed at his insides. He started to hallucinate. He saw feasts, banquets, a single piece of bread that he would have killed for. His resentment towards Zeph grew. The old pirate was hoarding all that food, letting him starve. On the 70th day, the hunger finally broke him. Driven by a primal, desperate madness, Sanji took a sharp rock, his first weapon, and crept towards the old man. He was going to kill him and take his food. He raised the rock over the sleeping pirate's head. He looked at the large sack of food. It was still full. He tore it open with his free hand, ready to claim his prize. It was filled with treasure. Gold, jewels, valuables from the orbit, not a single crumb of food. Sanji froze, his mind unable to process what he was seeing. He looked from the treasure to the still figure of Zeph. He looked at the old man's leg, or where his leg should have been. Zeph's right leg was gone, severed crudely below the knee. The wound was old, scarred over. And beside him was a pile of small, gnawed bones. The truth crashed down on Sanji with a force greater than any wave. Zeph had given him all the food, all of it, and to survive, the old pirate he had eaten his own leg. Zeph's eyes opened. He wasn't asleep. He looked at the boy, at the rock in his hand, at the torn bag of treasure. He didn't look angry. He just looked tired. "You're still alive, brat," Zeph rasped. Sanji dropped the rock. He crawled towards Zeph, tears and snot streaming down his face, the sound of his own horrified sobs echoing in the silence. The debt was instantaneous, absolute, and eternal. This man had sacrificed his leg, his career as a pirate. Everything, to save a boy he didn't even know. "Why?" Sanji wailed. "Why did you do it?" "Because," Zeph said, looking out at the endless horizon. "You have the same stupid dream I did." Present day. The memory, as sharp and painful as the day it was forged, gave Sanji a terrifying clarity. He would not let Krieg take this man from him. He would rather die. He took a step forward. "Let him go. Krieg, stay back," Krieg shrieked, pressing the blade closer to Zeph's throat. But as this was happening, something else was going on. Nami, ever the pragmatist, saw the situation for what it was, a stalemate. A perfect distraction. She saw the Krieg pirates, their attention fixed on the drama. She saw Naruto, Sanji, everyone, focused on the hostage. And she saw the Going Merry. Their beautiful ship, full of their supplies and all the treasure she had managed to liberate, so far, bobbing gently at the dock. An old, familiar coldness settled in her heart. This was getting too dangerous. Mahawk, Don Krieg, a captain who leapt into fights without a thought for the consequences. This wasn't a clever treasure-hunting crew. This was a magnet for trouble. She thought of her village. Of the 100 million berries she still needed. She had a goal, a debt of her own. And it was more important than them. More important than this feeling of camaraderie she had started to let herself enjoy. With a final, pained look at her crewmates, she made a decision. She slipped away from the edge of the crowd, her movements silent and invisible in the chaos. She crept back to their ship. Usopp saw her. He was perched on the railing, trying to get a clear shot at Krieg, when he saw Nami slinking away. He saw her untie the mooring ropes. He opened his mouth to shout, but no sound came out. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. She was leaving them. She was betraying them. Back on the deck, Naruto looked from Krieg's desperate face to Sanji's terrified one. He took a slow breath. The orange aura around him receding, replaced by an unnerving calm. "You think a hostage gives you power over me," Naruto said to Krieg. "But you don't get it. A king doesn't negotiate with thieves. He doesn't bow to threats. He protects his people." He looked at Sanji. "He's not going to die. I won't let him." Then, he did something no one expected. He dropped into a low stance, and with a surge of chakra, he slammed both his palms flat onto the deck of the Bharati. The entire ship, the whole massive, fish-shaped restaurant, lurched violently, as if hit by an underwater earthquake. The shockwave threw everyone off balance. Krieg, standing on one leg and holding Zeph, was completely unprepared. He stumbled, his grip on Zeph loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all Naruto needed. He moved. He wasn't a blur of speed this time. He was something else. He was a clone, appearing from a puff of smoke directly behind Krieg, while the real Naruto hadn't moved from his spot. The clone technique was so fast, so seamless, it was like teleportation. The clone chopped Krieg's wrist, freeing Zeph, while simultaneously kicking the back of Krieg's knee, forcing him to the ground. The real Naruto shot forward. "My turn," he growled. He grabbed the front of Krieg's golden armor, lifted the entire man into the air with one hand, and looked him in the eye. All of Krieg's weapons were gone. His men were terrified. His hostage was free. He had nothing left but his pride. And Naruto was about to take that too. He didn't just punch him. He channeled his rage, his power, his absolute conviction into one final, devastating attack. Massive Rasengan. The sphere of blue energy in his hand expanded, growing to the size of a beach ball, its roar deafening. He slammed it into Krieg's chest. The Wirtz steel armor, the pride of Krieg's arsenal, didn't just dent. It shattered, exploding outwards in a shower of golden shrapnel. The force of the blast lifted Krieg off his feet and launched him like a cannonball, sending him flying clear over the ruins of his own flagship and into the distant sea, where he landed with a tiny, insignificant splash. Silence. The reign of the most feared pirate in the East Blue had ended not with a grand battle, but with a swift, absolute, and terrifying display of power. It was Jin who broke the silence. He walked over to the edge of the deck, looking out at where his captain had vanished. He turned to Sanji. "He will not trouble you again." He bowed deeply. "Thank you for the food. I will never forget my debt to you." He then gathered the remaining terrified Krieg pirates and sailed away on a small, damaged vessel, leaving the Bharati in peace. As the adrenaline faded, reality set in. Usopp finally found his voice. "Nami," he screamed, pointing a shaking finger towards the open sea. "She's gone. She took the Mary, and the treasure." Everyone looked. The Going Mary was a small dot on the horizon, sailing away as fast as the wind would take her. A collective sense of shock and betrayal fell over the group. Naruto just stared. He wasn't angry. He wasn't surprised. He had seen the conflict in her eyes. He knew she was running from something. And for a moment, he had thought she had found a place to stop running. He was wrong. In the aftermath, as Zoro was being patched up by the Bharati's doctor, Zeph approached Sanji. "So, brat, you going to go after them?" "No," Sanji said, lighting a cigarette, his voice rough. "This is my place. I owe you everything. I'm not leaving." Zeph scoffed. He walked into the kitchen and came back with a plate of soup. He tasted it. "This is disgusting. Vile. I can't believe how terrible a cook you've become. We don't need you here. Get out." The other cooks joined in. "Yeah, your food stinks, Sanji. We're better off without you." It was a clumsy, transparent, and beautiful lie. Sanji saw right through it. They were pushing him away, releasing him from his debt, forcing him to follow his own dream. Tears welled in Sanji's eyes, mixing with the smoke from his cigarette. He bowed, a deep, long bow that touched his head to the deck. His voice was choked with an motion that spanned a decade of hardship and gratitude. "Owner Zeph, for all this time, for everything, thank you." He cried, the words torn from his soul. "I will never forget you." He stood up, wiped his eyes, and walked over to Naruto. He was dressed in his black suit, a small pack over his shoulder. "I heard you guys needed a cook. I want to find the All Blue. It looks like our destination is in the same direction." Naruto looked at his new crewmate, the lovesick brawler with a heart of gold. He looked at Zoro, wounded but alive, a new fire in his eyes. He looked at Usopp, who was staring at the horizon with a look of hurt confusion. They were a mess. They were battered, betrayed, and now, they were shipless. He broke into a wide, confident grin. "All right," he said, looking out at the endless sea where Nami had disappeared. "We've got our cook. Now, let's go get our navigator back." Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Fish Man and the Price of a Village. The aftermath of victory felt hollow. Zoro was bandaged and unconscious. His breathing shallow. Sanji, having said his tearful goodbyes, now stood awkwardly on the deck of a place that was no longer his home, a new crewmate without a crew. Usopp stared at the horizon, the spot where the Going Merry had vanished, a gaping hole in his worldview. And Naruto? Naruto was just quiet, his earlier fury replaced by a heavy, unreadable calm. They were stranded. Their ship, their navigator, and their treasure were gone. This is a mess, Red Leg Zeph grunted, limping over to Naruto. The old pirate chef looked at the unconscious Zoro, then at the desolate expressions on the others. That girl, she played you for fools. She had her reasons, Naruto said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. It wasn't a guess, it was a statement of fact. Reasons don't get you a ship, Zeph countered, though a flicker of respect showed in his eye. He sighed, a sound like gravel turning over. Fine, you saved my restaurant, you saved my brat's life. I won't see you stranded. He gestured to the cooks. Patty, Carne, prepare the sea chicken. Give them enough supplies for a week. Their temporary vessel was a small, fin-headed boat that was barely large enough for the four of them. As they were loading it, two figures stumbled onto the deck of the Bharati, leaning on each other for support. They were a strange pair, one with a tall, blocky hairstyle, the other with prominent sideburns and sunglasses. Both were covered in bandages. Zoro and Ikki, the blocky-haired one, Johnny, cried out upon seeing the unconscious swordsman. What happened to you? His partner, Yosaku, bowed deeply to Naruto. We are eternally in your debt. You saved us from drowning after we encountered that man. They were Zoro's former bounty hunting associates. They had followed Don Krieg's fleet, hoping to snag a bounty, and had been caught in the periphery of Mihawk's devastating attack on the Armada, their own small boat destroyed. Naruto's crew had pulled them from the water amidst the chaos. We saw where the girl went, Yosaku said, his expression grim. She was sailing east, on a direct course. There's only one place she could be going with that kind of speed and heading. The Konami Islands. Johnny shuddered. You don't want to go there, Aniki. That place is a nest of monsters. It's the domain of Arlong. Sawtooth. Arlong. The name fell like a stone in the suddenly silent air. Even the rough cooks of the Bharati looked uneasy. Arlong, Sanji repeated, lighting a cigarette. The fish man. I thought he was supposed to be in the Grand Line. He was, Yosaku confirmed, his voice low. But he came back, set up a fortress, Arlong Park. He rules those islands with an iron fist. The Marines in the area are on his payroll. No one goes in, and no one who lives there gets out. They say he's the most terrifying pirate in all the East Blue. A cold, dawning understanding began to settle over the group. Nami, who hated pirates more than anything, who stole from them with a righteous fury. Why would she flee to the stronghold of the most vicious pirate in the sea? It didn't make sense. Unless she wasn't fleeing to him. Naruto's expression hardened. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Let's go, he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. We're getting our navigator back. The journey on the sea chicken was a tense, miserable affair. The boat was cramped, and Zoro's groans of pain were a constant, grim reminder of the power that existed in this world. Yosaku and Johnny, grateful for their rescue, acted as guides. Their knowledge of the East Blue currents invaluable. The emotional atmosphere was even more cramped. I can't believe her, Usopp fumed, pacing the tiny deck. After everything we went through. She was our friend, our nakama, and she just left. She stole from us. Now, let's not be hasty, Sanji said smoothly, leaning against the cabin. Nami Swan is a beautiful, delicate flower. A woman of her grace and charm would never do something so cruel without a profound, heart-wrenching reason. I'm sure this is all a terrible misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, Zoro growled, pushing himself into a sitting position against the mast, his bandages stark against his skin. The movement clearly cost him, but his pride wouldn't let him show it. She's a thief. She betrayed us. When I see her, I'm cutting her down. You'll do no such thing, you moss-headed brute. Sanji snapped, his easygoing demeanor vanishing. If you lay one of your rusty butter knives on that celestial beauty, I'll kick you all the way back to the Bharati. Try it, dartboard eyebrow. Naruto let them argue. Their anger was a shield against the hurt. He understood that. He just stared at the horizon, his hands resting on his knees. His belief in Nami hadn't wavered. It had solidified. She wasn't a traitor. She was in a cage. And he was going to break it. As they neared the Konami Islands, the very air seemed to change. The sky grew overcast, the sea turned a murky, unwelcoming gray. The first village they came to, Gosa, was a scene of devastation. The houses were shattered, the fields trampled. The entire place looked like it had been savaged by a giant beast. A single, terrified man was trying to rebuild a wall. "What happened here?" Naruto asked, stepping ashore. The man flinched, looking at them with wide, fearful eyes. You're not with them, are you?" When he saw they weren't fishmen, he relaxed slightly. It was the sea monster. "Momu. We couldn't pay our tribute this month. Arlong sent his pet to make an example of us." Tribute. A protection racket. This wasn't a pirate stronghold, it was a kingdom built on fear. They pressed on, heading for the island's main town, Kokoyashi village. It was strangely quiet. The people on the streets eyed them with a mixture of suspicion and hostility. When they mentioned they were looking for Nami, the reaction was immediate and cold. "Don't know anyone by that name," a shopkeeper grunted, turning his back on them. "You'd best be on your way," a woman warned, pulling her child close. This is no place for outsiders. It was a wall of silence, built to protect something, or someone. They found their answer on a small hill overlooking the village, near a cliffside grave marked with a simple pinwheel. A young woman with short, blue hair and tattoos covering her arms was tending to the grave. She turned as they approached, her eyes hard and defiant. "If you're looking for Nami," she said, her voice sharp as broken glass, "you've wasted your time. Turn around and go home." "You know her," Sanji observed. "I'm Nojiko, her sister," she stated, crossing her tattooed arms. "Which means I know what's best for her. And what's best for her is for you people to disappear. She doesn't want you here. She doesn't need you. She's our navigator," Naruto said simply. "We need her." Nojiko let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "Her navigator? Is that what she told you? Let me guess. She also told you she hates pirates and that she's collecting money for a good cause." She took a step closer, her eyes blazing with a fierce, protective anger. "Everything she told you is a lie. She belongs to them. To Arlong. She's one of them. The sooner you accept that and leave, the better it will be for all of you." Before they could press her further, a commotion erupted from the village below. A group of fishmen, led by one with 6 arms and a puckered mouth, was swaggering down the main street. They moved with the casual arrogance of conquerors. "That's Hachi," Nojiko whispered, her voice tight with hatred. "One of Arlong's officers." They watched as a marine captain, a man with a face like a rat, scurried up to the fishmen, bowing and scraping, offering them a bag of money. It was a bribe, paid out in the open. The Marines were not just corrupt, they were employees. This was Nami's world, a world of monsters, fear, and absolute corruption. The cage was real, and its bars were closing in. Ignoring Nojiko's warnings, they made their way to the center of the island. There, they found it. A gaudy, imposing structure that was an affront to the natural beauty of the island. Arlong Park. A massive gate, adorned with the saw-nosed skull Jolly Roger, stood open, a mocking invitation. And inside, they saw her. Nami was lounging by a pool, laughing and drinking with a group of fishmen. The tattoo of Arlong's flag was stark and clear on her left shoulder. She was counting a stack of berry, her expression one of greedy satisfaction. She looked up as they entered, and her smile didn't falter. It just became colder, sharper. The sight was a physical blow. Usopp staggered back as if he'd been punched. Sanji's cigarette fell from his lips. Even Zoro, leaning heavily on the gate post, looked stunned. Nojiko had told them, but seeing her so comfortable, so at home among the monsters, it was a different kind of pain. "Well, look what the sea coughed up," Nami said, her voice dripping with a casual cruelty they had never heard before. "My old patsies, I was wondering when you'd show up. Did you enjoy your trip?" A massive fish man, this one with blue skin, a long, serrated nose, and a fur-lined captain's coat, rose from a throne-like chair by the pool. He grinned, a terrifying display of needle-sharp teeth. This was Arlong. The aura of power that rolled off him was immense, a physical pressure of raw, predatory strength. Sha ha ha ha, Arlong laughed, a sound like grinding rocks. Nami, these the weakling humans you were telling me about. The ones you so skillfully relieved of their ship and treasure. The very same, Nami said, not even looking at them, her attention focused on her stack of money. They were almost too easy. Stupid, trusting fools. Each word was a dagger. Usopp finally found his voice, his face a mask of hurt and rage. How could you, Nami? We trusted you. We were your friends. Nami finally looked at him, her eyes as cold and hard as diamonds. Friends. Don't be absurd. You were a means to an end. A ride, a distraction, and a source of income. Nothing more. I am an officer of the Arlong pirates. This is my crew. This is my family. Now, take your wounded swordsman and your pathetic cook and get off my island before Arlong decides to make fish food out of you. Sanji stepped forward, his face a storm of conflicting emotions. Nami Swan. This isn't you. Tell me this is a lie. The only lie was the one I sold you, she snapped. She stood up and walked over to Arlong, placing a familiar hand on his powerful arm. I belong here. Zoro pushed himself off the gate, his hand gripping Wado Ikimonji. I knew it. You're nothing but a backstabbing witch. It was then that Naruto finally spoke. He had been silent throughout the entire exchange, his expression unreadable. He had watched her, listened to her, and he had seen the truth she was trying so desperately to hide. He saw the faint tremor in her hand as she touched Arlong's arm. He saw the flicker of unbearable pain in her eyes that her cruel smile couldn't quite conceal. He walked forward, past his stunned and furious crewmates, until he stood just a few feet from her. He wasn't angry. He didn't look betrayed. He just looked sad. You're a terrible liar, Nami, he said, his voice quiet. Yet it carried across the entire courtyard. Nami flinched as if he'd slapped her. What did you say, you idiot? She hissed, her composure cracking for just a second. You can lie to them, Naruto continued, gesturing to the others. You can lie to him. He pointed to Arlong. You can even try to lie to yourself. But you can't lie to me. He took one more step, his blue eyes locking onto hers. Seeing past the hate into the terrified, hurting girl beneath. Your eyes, they're screaming for help. The words hit her harder than any physical attack. Her mask shattered. For a single, unguarded moment, her face crumpled. And a look of such profound despair and agony washed over her that it stole the breath from everyone watching. Arlong saw it too. His grin widened. Sha ha ha. It seems you, our old friends, still have some hold over you, Nami. Perhaps a demonstration of your loyalty is in order. Nami's face went pale. She looked at Naruto, at Usopp, at Sanji, at the wounded Zoro. She saw their determination. She knew they wouldn't leave. They would fight Arlong for her. And they would die, horribly. She had to make them hate her. She had to make them leave. She had to save them, even if it meant destroying herself. She steeled herself, the cold mask of cruelty slamming back into place, harder and more impenetrable than before. She pulled a small, wicked-looking dagger from her belt. You're right, she said, her voice shaking with a rage that wasn't entirely feigned. You won't leave. You won't listen. So I'll have to make you. She turned, and with a scream of what looked like pure, murderous intent, she lunged. But she didn't lunge at Naruto. She lunged at Usopp, the one she knew was the most emotionally vulnerable. The dagger flashed in the sun. Usopp was too shocked to even move. He just stood there, his eyes wide with disbelief as the girl he considered his friend plunged a knife towards his chest. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Navigator's Tears. The dagger plunged downwards. The gasp from the onlookers was a collective wave of horror. Usopp didn't even have time to flinch, his eyes locked on Nami's, seeing not the cold fury she was projecting, but the sheer, screaming terror beneath it. Then, a sharp, searing pain erupted in his arm. He looked down. The knife was buried deep in the flesh of his left bicep, missing his chest by a crucial, deliberate foot. Blood welled up, dark and hot, soaking his sleeve. Nami hadn't tried to kill him. She had tried to miss. It was a wound, not an execution. It was a performance. She ripped the blade out, her hand trembling. See, She spat, her voice a ragged, unconvincing snarl. This is who I am. Now get out of here before I aim for the heart. Arlong roared with laughter, a booming, arrogant sound that echoed across the courtyard. Sha ha ha ha, excellent, Nami, you've finally shed your weak human sentimentality. I'm proud of you. Usopp stumbled back, clutching his bleeding arm, his face a mask of pained confusion. Sanji and Zoro, however, were no longer confused. They were incandescent with rage. Sanji's voice was a low growl, the lovesick fool completely burned away, leaving only a cold fury. He took a step forward, his leg already raised for a kick. I'll cut you to pieces, Zoro vowed, his hand gripping Wado Ikimonji, his wounded body forgotten in a surge of adrenaline. But before either of them could launch their attack, a hand clamped down on each of their shoulders. It was Naruto. His grip was like iron, stopping them dead. Stop, he commanded. His voice was quiet, but it held an absolute authority that brooked no argument. Naruto, what are you doing? Zoro demanded, trying to shrug him off. She's the enemy. No, she's not, Naruto said, his eyes never leaving Nami's. He saw her relief, the brief, almost imperceptible sag in her shoulders when he'd confirmed her bluff had worked. He turned his gaze to the still laughing Arlong. He had the what, he now needed the why. He wasn't going to get it by starting a war he wasn't prepared for. He walked over to Usopp, his movements calm and deliberate. He ripped a strip of cloth from the bottom of his own jumpsuit and began to expertly wrap the wound, applying pressure to stop the bleeding. We're leaving. The words stunned everyone. Arlong's laughter tapered off into a confused smirk. Sanji and Zoro stared at their captain in disbelief. This was a retreat. It was unthinkable. Leaving, Usopp whispered, his head spinning from pain and betrayal. But, Nami, we're leaving, Naruto repeated, his tone final. Fortless Ly lifted the wounded sniper into his arms. For now, he turned and began to walk towards the gate, not even sparing Nami another glance. Sanji and Zoro stood frozen for a moment, torn betway. Their rage and their captain's inexplicable order. With a final, shared look of murderous intent towards Arlong, they followed, their footsteps heavy with frustration. Nami watched them go, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. It had worked. They were leaving. They were safe. The price was their hatred, their scorn, the complete destruction of the only real friendship she had ever known. She felt a tear slide down her cheek and quickly, angrily, wiped it away before Arlong could see. They regrouped at the edge of Kokoyashi village, the tension between them a thick, suffocating blanket. Johnny and Yosaku, who had witnessed the whole thing from a distance, looked on with worried expressions. Captain, what was that? Sanji demanded, rounding on Naruto. We could have taken them. We should have fought for Nami Swan. Fighting blind is how you get killed, Naruto said, gently setting Usopp down and inspecting his wound. I told you, she's not our enemy. Something else is going on here. And I'm going to find out what it is. What is there to find out? Zoro growled, leaning against a palm tree. She's one of them. She stabbed Usopp, and missed his heart on purpose, Naruto shot back. She was putting on a show for the fish man. A show to make us leave. Now, shut up and let me think. His decisive calm silenced them. They trusted him, even when they didn't understand him. His judgment had been flawless so far. It was then that Nojiko appeared, walking towards them from the direction of the cliffside grave. Her earlier hostility was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. She had seen it all. You're still here, she stated. It wasn't a question. We're not leaving without our navigator, Naruto said, looking up at her. Nojiko looked at Usopp's bandaged arm, then at the determined faces of the rest of the crew. She let out a long, shuddering sigh, a sound of defeat. You really are idiots, aren't you? You just won't give up on her. She gestured for them to follow. Come on. If you're going to be this stubborn, you might as well know the truth. You should know what kind of cage she's really in. She led them through the village, past the silent, hostile glares of the villagers, to her small house. It was built into a tangerine grove, the air sweet with the scent of citrus. She sat them down, made tea she knew none of them would drink, and began to tell a story. It was a story of a fierce, loving, and reckless ex-marine named Belmere, who had returned from a battlefield not with medals, but with 2 orphaned war babies, a quiet, blue-haired Nojiko, and a fiery, orange-haired Nami. It was a story of poverty, and laughter, and a family held together not by blood, but by a bond far stronger. A story of pinwheels planted on a grave to chase away the sadness. And a grove of tangerines that were a legacy of love. Then, the story turned dark. It became a story of the day the sea turned black with a pirate flag, the day Arlong and his fishmen arrived. They weren't raiders. They were conquerors. They demanded a tribute from every single person in the village. 100,000 berry for every adult, 50,000 for every child. Pay, or die. Belmere had only 100,000 berry saved. It was enough for her, but not for her daughters. The villagers had tried to lie for her, to hide the children. But Belmere couldn't do it. She couldn't deny she was a mother. She put the 100,000 berry on the table. That's for my daughters, she had told Arlong. And Arlong, to make an example, to teach the village the price of defiance, had put a pistol to Belmere's head and pulled the trigger. Right in front of her 2 small children. The room was silent, the weight of the story pressing down on them. Sanji's cigarette had burned down to his fingers, forgotten. Zoro's and was clenched so tightly on his sword hilt that his knuckles were white. Usopp's own pain was forgotten, replaced by a horrified empathy. Nojiko's voice was a dead, emotionless monotone as she came to the end. Arlong, seeing Nami's talent for drawing maps even as a child, had made her an offer. She would become his cartographer, an officer in his crew. In exchange, he made a deal with her. If she could bring him 100 million berry, he would sell Kokoyashi village and everyone in it back to her. He would leave them in peace. For 8 years, Nojiko said, her voice finally breaking, tears streaming down her face. For 8 years, she has lived among those monsters, letting them think she's one of them. She's stolen, she's lied, she's let the entire world, even her own village, hate her. All to buy back our freedom. Every berry she's ever taken has been for us. She's been fighting this war all by herself. Everything clicked into place. The obsession with money, the hatred of pirates, the betrayal. It was all an act. A long, agonizing, 8-year performance on a stage of fear and oppression. As the horrifying truth settled over them, the town's doctor, who had been listening from the doorway, burst in. His face pale with a new panic. It's the Marines. A whole ship of them has landed. A flicker of hope ignited. Real Marines? Usopp asked. Yes, they're headed for the Tangerine Grove. They must be here to arrest Arlong. But Naruto knew better. He had seen the rat-faced captain, Nezumi, taking bribes. His expression darkened. No, he said, standing up. They're not. They arrived at the edge of the grove just in time to see the unthinkable. The Marines, led by Captain Nezumi, were hauling bags of money out of the ground from a hidden stash beneath Belmere's pinwheel. Nami was there, fighting them with a desperate, frantic energy, a wild animal protecting its nest. That's mine, she screamed, tears of rage and desperation streaking her face. I earned that. You can't take it. Orders from Arlong. Girly, Nezumi sneered, shoving her to the ground. All undocumented treasure on this island is to be confiscated by the world government. It's the law. It was the final, most cruel betrayal. She had done it. She had finally reached her goal of 100 million berry. And Arlong, who had been watching her the whole time, had simply sent his pet marine to take it all away. He had never had any intention of honoring their deal. Her entire life's work, her mother's sacrifice, the hatred she had endured, it was all for nothing. The villagers, who had gathered at the news, finally understood. The truth of Nami's sacrifice hit them like a physical blow. Their scorn turned to shame, their suspicion to a fierce, protective love. The village elder, Genzo, drew an old sword. This has gone on long enough. He roared. To Arlong Park. We will die on our feet before we live another day on our knees. The villagers roared their assent, a wave of suicidal bravery. They were going to fight. They were going to die. Nami watched them go, her face a mask of numb horror. She had failed. Everything was lost. She stumbled through the trampled grove, her legs barely holding her. She fell to her knees in the dirt where her treasure had been, the dirt where her mother was buried. She looked at the Arlong tattoo on her arm, the brand of her enslavement, the symbol of her failure. She pulled out the dagger she had used on Usopp, its blade still stained with his blood. And with a scream that was not human, a sound of pure, undiluted agony and rage, she began to stab it. Driving the point of the knife into her own flesh again and again, trying to cut the hated mark from her body. The others watched, frozen, from the edge of the trees. It was a scene of such raw, private despair that it felt like a violation to witness. Naruto walked out of the trees. He walked slowly, deliberately, until he was standing right behind her. He didn't try to stop her. He didn't offer empty words of comfort. He just stood there, a silent, immovable presence, and let her break. She stabbed and stabbed until her arm was a bloody mess, until she had no strength left. The dagger fell from her numb fingers. She was empty. She had nothing left. She finally turned, her face streaked with dirt and tears and blood, and looked up at the man who had seen through her lies from the very beginning. Her whole body trembled, and her voice was a broken whisper. "Naruto," she choked out, her last wall of defense crumbling into dust. "Help me." Naruto didn't smile. His expression was one of profound, solemn purpose. He reached up and took off the simple straw hat he'd taken to wearing against the sun at sea. He gently placed it on her head, covering her eyes. It was an act of protection, of comfort, of acceptance. She clutched at the hat, her fingers digging into the straw, and finally let out the sob she had been holding back for 8 years. Naruto turned his back to her, facing the direction of Arlong Park. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs, and then he let it out in a roar that shook the very trees, a declaration of war that echoed across the entire island. "Of course I will." He didn't need to look behind him. He could feel them. Zoro, his hand on his swords, the pain from his wound completely ignored. Sanji, his cigarette crushed between his teeth, his leg muscles coiled and ready. Usopp, his arm throbbing, but his slingshot clutched in his hand, his eyes filled with a new, hard resolve. Their doubts and anger were gone, burned away and reforged into a single, unified purpose. Naruto cracked his knuckles, the sound like gunshots in the sudden silence. "All right," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He started walking. "Let's go wreck a park." Zoro, Sanji, and Usopp fell into step beside him. 4 figures, silhouetted against the setting sun, walking with a calm, deliberate stride towards the fortress of the monster who had taken everything from their friend. They weren't going to ask for it back. They were going to take it. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The maelstrom's roar. The walk was silent. The only sounds were the crunch of our boots on the gravel path and the distant, mocking music from Arlong Park. They walked 4 abreast, a unified front of impending destruction. Zoro, his bandaged chest a stark white against the gloom, his hand never leaving his swords. Sanji, his suit immaculate but his face a mask of cold fury, a fresh cigarette clamped between his teeth. Usopp, his wounded arm held stiffly at his side, his eyes scanning the path ahead with a sniper's focus, his fear burned away by a cold, hard rage. And Naruto, leading them by a half step, his expression placid, his gaze fixed on their destination, a Wakan. Embodiment of a promise made and a debt about to be paid. The villagers saw them. They had gathered at the edge of Kokoyasi, a ragtag army of farmers and shopkeepers armed with old swords and gardening tools, ready to march to their deaths. They stopped, their own righteous fury faltering in the face of the silent, overwhelming resolve of the 4 outsiders. Genzo, the village elder, stepped in their path, his hand on the hilt of his sword. "This is not your fight," he said, his voice a low growl. "We have stood by and done nothing for 8 years while that child suffered. The price for that shame is ours to pay." Naruto didn't stop walking. He didn't even look at him. "She asked me for help," he said, his voice calm and even. "She's my navigator. She's my friend. That makes it my fight." He walked right past Genzo. And the villagers parted before him like the sea before a tidal wave. They watched them go, 4 figures against the twilight, a force more potent than any army. They were not marching to their deaths. They were marching to war. They reached the gates of Arlong Park. The music was louder now, a jarring, celebratory tune. The fish men inside were laughing, drinking, reveling in their final cruel victory over Nami. Arlong sat on his throne, a crown on his head, a king in his castle of stolen dreams. He saw them approach. His shark-like grin widened. Sha ha ha ha. Back for more, you pathetic humans. Have you come to beg for the lives of your village? It's too late. This island is mine. Naruto stopped just before the closed, ornate gates. He didn't shout. He didn't make a speech. The time for words was over. He simply drew his right fist back. The air around it shimmered with a faint, blue aura. He punched the gate. The impact was not a crash, it was an explosion. The massive stone and iron gates didn't swing open. They disintegrated. A shockwave of pure force erupted outwards, turning the entrance of Arlong Park into a cloud of dust and shrapnel. The celebratory music screeched to a halt. The laughter died in 100 gurgling throats. Naruto walked through the settling dust, his crew fanning out behind him. I've come to tear your little kingdom down to the rock, he said. His voice resonating with a dangerous calm. Arlong's grin vanished, replaced by a mask of incandescent rage. You dare to damage Arlong Park. My palace. Kill them all. Show these worthless insects the superiority of the fish-man race. The horde charged. Dozens of fishmen, their bodies far stronger and more durable than any normal human, surged forward with a collective, bestial roar. Stay out of my way, Naruto said, not to the enemy, but to his own crew. He began to walk forward, his pace unhurried, directly towards Arlong's throne. The first wave of fishmen reached him. They were swept aside like leaves in a typhoon. A punch that didn't seem to travel more than an inch sent one flying. A simple, open-palmed block shattered the jaw of another. He wasn't fighting them. He was dismissing them, an unstoppable force carving a straight path through the chaos towards his true target. The rest of the battle erupted around him. You heard the captain. Usopp yelled, a wild, triumphant grin on his face. He leapt onto a ruined wall, his slingshot in hand. His fear was gone, replaced by the righteous fury of a warrior defending his friend. Special attack. Exploding star. A pellet flew into the thickest part of the charging mob and detonated, sending a dozen fishmen flying. He was their artillery, his lies and tricks forged into a genuine weapon of war. Kurubi, the master of fishman karate, shot through the water of the central pool, aiming to ambush Naruto from the side. Your journey ends here, human. My journey hasn't even started, a cool voice replied. Sanji's black-shoed foot intercepted Kurubi's attack with a sound like cracking stone. The two martial artists locked, a flurry of kicks and chops that churned the water into a froth. Kurubi dragged Sanji into his element, but the cook was relentless, his own powerful kicks sending shockwaves through the water until a final, decisive collier shoot to tea. He next sent the fish man flying out of the pool, unconscious before he even landed. Zoro faced Hachi, the six-armed octopus fish man. 6 swords against 3, Hachi laughed, drawing his blades. You don't stand a chance. Especially with that wound. Zoro didn't answer. The promise he had made, screamed to the heavens as he lay bleeding on the deck of the Bharati, echoed in his soul. I will never lose again. Hachi's 6-sword whirlwind was a dizzying, deadly offense, but Zoro's will was stronger. He pushed through the agony in his chest, his 3 blades a perfect, synchronized defense. He saw an opening, a flicker of an instant, and lunged, 3-sword style, dragon twister. He spun, a vortex of steel and will that shattered Hachi's swords and his confidence, tossing the octopus man into a wall where he collapsed in a defeated heap. Through it all, Naruto walked. He never slowed, he never deviated, he was a force of nature, and his destination was Arlong. The fish-man king finally rose from his throne, his own rage reaching a boiling point. The floor was littered with his unconscious men, all defeated by a single, walking human. You think you are strong, human? Arlong roared, drawing a massive, saw-toothed blade called the Kuribaki. I will show you the difference in our species. I will tear you limb from limb. He charged, swinging the giant blade. Naruto stopped walking and met the attack with his bare hands. He caught the massive serrated sword between his palms, the force of the blow creating a crater beneath his feet. His muscles strained, but he held it. Is that it? Naruto asked, his voice a low growl. Is this the power you used to terrorize a child for 8 years? He twisted his hands, and with a screech of protesting metal, the Kuribaki snapped in two. Arlong stared in stunned disbelief at his broken weapon. Naruto's fist slammed into his gut, lifting the massive fish man off the ground and sending him crashing through his own throne. The real fight began. Arlong was a beast. He was immensely strong, his teeth could shatter stone, and his speed, especially in the water, was incredible. He threw Naruto into the pool, holding him under, trying to drown him. But Naruto exploded out of the water, propelled by a blast of chakra. He landed on the roof of the main building, Arlong rocketing after him with his shark on darts technique. The battle raged across Arlong Park, a devastating ballet of destruction. But it was an ideological battle as much as a physical one. Humans are weak, flawed, inferior, Arlong screamed, biting a chunk of a stone pillar and spitting it like a bullet. Strength is justice. My strength gives me the right to rule them, to use them as I see fit. That girl was my tool, my property. She is not your property. Naruto roared back, his voice finally breaking its cold calm, replaced by a volcanic fury. He created a dozen clones that swarmed Arlong. She is our friend, and you don't own your friends. You protect them. The clones were a distraction, forcing Arlong to defend himself from all sides. The real Naruto was above him, gathering a massive amount of energy in his palm. He shot downwards, aiming for the very heart of the building. The attack smashed Arlong through the roof and into the chamber below. The highest room in the tower. Nami's prison. Naruto landed amidst the scattered debris. He looked around, and his rage reached its zenith. The walls were covered, floor to ceiling, with maps. Hundreds of them, meticulously drawn, beautiful, and stained with 8 years of tears and despair. A quill pen still lay on a desk. A drop of ink wet on its tip, a testament to a life stolen. Arlong pushed himself out of the rubble, laughing. You see, this is her place. This is where she belongs. No matter where that treacherous bitch runs, she will always be my cartographer. Belongs. Naruto whispered, his voice dangerously quiet. He turned to face Arlong, his entire body now glowing with a furious golden aura of Kurama's chakra. This room is the one thing in this world that has no right to exist. He looked at Arlong, at the monster who had built this cage. You took her life. You took her smile. You took her mother. And you made her cry. He raised his hand, and a Rasengan formed, larger and more violent than any he had created before. It roared like a captured sun. I am going to destroy everything about this place, he declared. And I'm starting with you. He shot forward. He didn't just hit Arlong. He slammed the massive Rasengan into the fish man's chest and kept pushing, driving him down through the floor, down through the second level, down through the first. He drove him into the very foundations of Arlong Park. Giant Rasengan. The entire building exploded. Not just the map room, but the whole central tower erupted in a cataclysmic blast of wind and energy. The structure that had stood as a symbol of oppression and fear for 8 long years was annihilated. Blown apart from the inside out until nothing was left but a pile of smoking rubble. As the dust began to settle, Naruto stood in the center of the wreckage, not even breathing heavily. Arlong lay at his feet, unconscious, defeated. His kingdom of fear reduced to a memory. The battle was over. The silence that followed was broken by a single, collective gasp. The villagers had arrived. They stood at the shattered gates, looking at the scene of utter devastation, at the 4 young pirates standing victorious amidst the ruins of their prison. Nami was with them. She had followed, unable to stay away. She stared at the pile of rubble that had once been her cage, her eyes wide. The maps, her work, her pain, her curse, all of it was gone. Wiped from the face of the earth. A single tear aced a path through the grime on her cheek. But it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of liberation. Just as the cheers were about to begin, the rat-faced Marine Captain Nezumi and his men marched into the ruins. By the authority of the world government, he announced, puffing out his chest, we will be taking credit for this victory and confiscating all of Arlong's treasure. Naruto didn't even turn to look at him. A single shadow clone appeared beside the corrupt Marine. Get lost, the clone said, before delivering one swift punch that sent Nezumi and his entire squad flying into the horizon. A comical twinkle in the sky marking their departure. Then, the celebration began. It was a party that consumed the entire island, a riot of joy and relief that lasted for 3 days. There was feasting, dancing, and drinking. For the first time in 8 years, the people of Kokoyasi village were free. On the third night, Nami slipped away from the festivities. She walked to the cliffside grave, the pinwheel spinning gently in the sea breeze. She placed a fresh tangerine on the headstone. "I'm free, Belmere-san," she whispered. "I finally have a real family. Ready to go." She turned. Naruto was standing there, the borrowed straw hat still on his head. She walked up to him and took the hat, placing it back where it belonged. Then, she looked him in the eye, her own gaze clear and bright, free of the shadows that had haunted it for so long. A brilliant, genuine smile lit up her face. "Naruto," she declared, her voice ringing with a joy that was infectious. "I'm still your navigator. Take me with you to sea." Naruto's own grin was as wide as the horizon. "Yeah, let's go." They walked back to the docks, where the Going Merry, recovered and restocked by the grateful villagers, was waiting. Zoro, Sanji, and Usopp were already on board. A full crew, a real crew. Nami leapt onto the deck, her rightful place. "Set sail for the Grand Line," she commanded, unfurling a new, blank map. It was not a chart of imprisonment, but a chart of adventure. A chart of her own choosing. As the Going Merry pulled away from the cheering island, the 5 of them stood on the deck, looking forward. They were a strange, mismatched group. A maelstrom in human form who would be Pirate King, a swordsman who would be the world's greatest, a cook in search of a mythical sea, a sniper who would become a brave warrior, and a navigator who was finally charting her own course. Their journey had just begun. Chapter 10 End.